Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Emma ran into the hall, tugging down her skirt with one hand and trying to button her blouse with the other. Her hands were shaking, and her hair was disheveled. And her eyes were filled with horror. It's good that it's dark in the hall, and the guests are already drunk, and no one pays attention to me. She thought frantically for a moment, stopping to look for her friend. "Kayla," Emma whispered in her ear, looking around worriedly. "Can we go home soon?" "No way." She pouted her lips capriciously. "It's the middle of the evening, and you're back already." Kayla asked in a drunken voice. "I thought I wouldn't see you until morning." "What's the matter with you?" "Where are you taking me?" "Leave me alone. I don't want to go." "Please be quiet." "I'm begging you," my friend whispered. "Let's go outside. I'll explain everything to you." "What's going on?" Pulling her hand out of Emma's grasp, Kayla asked, "Oh, what's wrong with your blouse? Is there blood on your sleeve? And why are the buttons ripped out? Where have you been?" "Kayla," Emma burst into tears, "I killed him." "What?" Kayla shrieked, and instantly her eyes became more meaningful. "You did what?" "I killed him." "Shut up, stupid." The girl clamped her friend's mouth shut. "Do you know who his father is?" She whispered in panic. "He'll roll you in concrete when he finds out you killed his only son." I didn't mean to." Emma sobbed. "It was an accident." "Emma," finally. Kayla rushed to greet her friend as soon as she opened the door to the room. "I've already set the table. We're going to celebrate you getting into college." "I didn't get in." The girl pressed her back against the door, helplessly dropped her bag, covered her face with her hands and cried. Can you imagine? Just 2 points short. "Oh, come on." Kayla looked at her friend, stunned. "You did well in your exams, didn't you?" "I failed the last one." "That's a shame. What are you going to do?" "There's not much choice. Either get a job here or go home and study, and then apply again in the summer." "Stay." Kayla cheered up. "You'll get a job. We'll rent an apartment for 2. It'll be cheaper. Well, this dormitory, do you know how we'll live?" She smiled dreamily. "We'll find ourselves rich guys, not like our village ones." "No, I'll go home." Disappointed Emma sat down at the table and smiled wryly. "What's there to do in our village? There are no good jobs. Are you going to work for pennies all your life?" "Stay. You know Jack and I are getting married soon. He's coming back from the army in 2 months." "Jack." Kayla snorted contemptuously. "You're going to sit in our hole until you die." "Why do you say that?" Emma was offended at her friend. "Jack is very nice. We love each other. I'm not going to stay at home. I'll prepare well, and next year I'll definitely enroll." "I really want to study." "I don't understand. What do you see in him?" "Are you hoping Jack will let you go to the city to study?" "Sure. I'll bring him along and we'll study together." "I can't believe he'd let you go. And there's so many boys here. It's amazing." "I met one recently. Not the son of an oligarch, but he's nice too. Though he grew up in an orphanage, but you can see he's promising. I'm not going to marry him. In general, I think that one should first take everything from life and then start a family. By the way, Lime has a friend named John, and he's exactly the kind of man every self-respecting girl dreams of, and I won't be me if I can't get him into bed. What are you thinking? You're here to study, remember? One can't stop the other. You know what? I'm gonna make a strong statement. Wipe your tears, make yourself presentable. Let's go to the cafe." "Why?" Emma was surprised. "You have a great table set up. You can't waste food." "It's okay. Let's go. You just need to unwind. An hour later, the girls were sitting at a table on soft, cozy, leather sofas in a cafe not far from the dormitory where Kayla lived. They were chatting animatedly, recalling stories from their school life without noticing anyone around them. What a nice meeting, suddenly they heard. Liam? John? Kayla smiled. May I sit at your table? Without waiting for permission, the boys sat down next to the girls. Liam took a seat next to Kayla and John next to Emma. Kayla, John addressed her, introduce us to your friend. Emma, these are my acquaintances. Reluctantly said the girl, noticing with what interest John looked at her friend. Liam, John. Girls, Liam looked from one to the other in astonishment. If I didn't know that you Kayla didn't have any sisters, I would have thought you were related. You look so much alike. Yes, even at school we were often confused. Kayla laughed, a light of envy in her eyes. She saw the way John looked at Emma. What did he see in her? Oh no, she thought, smiling and making eyes at John across from her. I'm not going to let this man get away from me. This man will be mine. Emma sat back, squeezing herself so as not to accidentally touch the young man with her elbow or knee. She felt awkward in the company of strange men. Kayla, Emma, I'm inviting you to my birthday party this weekend. John studied the new acquaintance with interest. He definitely liked her. They look alike. He thought to himself after a while. But how different internally. Emma is modest, quiet, doesn't try to draw attention to herself, while Kayla goes out of her way to make me like her. Why don't we go to my house in the country? We'll organize everything, kebabs, wine, champagne, music. In general, everything as it should be. You'll be the centerpiece of our party. Great. Kayla clapped her hands. We'll be there, of course. Excuse me, Emma said quietly. I can't. I have tickets home. She paused for a second and added firmly, and I have a fiancé waiting for me. What a pity. Sincerely saddened the young man. Can't you change your plans for me? It's my birthday? No, but Kayla will definitely support your company. Kayla, Liam took her hand in his and kissed it. Are you coming? I'll pick you up. I haven't decided yet. The girl answered. Emma? John looked carefully into her eyes. Think about it. You can leave the next day, give up the tickets, and I'll reimburse you the difference. I don't want to leave you guys. You're such great girls. Kayla. Emma stood up resolutely. I think we should go. Goodbye. We're not saying goodbye to you girls. John said playfully after them. I hope you change your mind. When Kayla got to the dormitory, she gave Emma a hard time. Why do you keep going home to home? The guy invited her, and she's not even thinking about it. Let's go together. I'm afraid to go alone. I don't know anyone except the landlord and Liam. Such a chance to be in John's house. It's not fair of you to just leave like that. I've got to do everything I can to get him to pay attention to me. What would you do, stay a day? Why, John, you've got Liam. He's just a bridge to get me to a real man. What's he got to do with it? Kayla grinned contemptuously. He's just a pale semblance of his friend. Here, John, she rolled her eyes dreamily. That's a man. Did you get a sense of how strong, assertive he is? He knows for sure the whole world is rightfully his. With Daddy's money. Emma grinned. So what? Kayla took offense. It's their family business that's going to him anyway. It's not his fault his parents are worried about his future. I think Liam loves you. Did you notice how he looked at you all night and was jealous of you while you made eyes at John? Don't you feel sorry for him? Let him love himself to his heart's content. Kayla waved her hand nonchalantly. He can't give me anything. unlike John. Do you know how rich his father is? Come with me, please. What's it worth to you? Let's see how rich people live. It's just a party. I promise Jack won't find out. Don't you want your friend to be happy? The girl whined. This is such a chance. If you are satisfied with Jack as a future husband, I'm not going to live in poverty all my life. Go for it. I'm sure you won't regret it. All right. Emma made up her mind. But I have to go home first thing in the morning the next day. Promise you won't talk me into staying late? Thank you. Kayla squealed with joy and rushed over to kiss the girl. I promise. I knew you wouldn't leave me. You're a true friend. At John's country house, the party was in full swing when Emma and Kayla arrived. John. The young man knelt down on the lap of a beautiful blonde with a thin waist, exemplary figure draped in a dress of a famous brand. Don't be bored. Let's go dancing. Get off. The young man rudely pushed her down. I don't want to go anywhere. He frowned, glancing at the door from time to time. I'm so sick of you all. He pondered, looking at the motley crowd of young people who sang, talked loudly, kissed and danced unashamedly. The same faces. Phi John. Again a girl came up to him. How rude you are. Come to me. I'll entertain you. She reached up to kiss him. We had a good time with you. At that time, the girls entered the living room and stopped, looking around at the crowd in embarrassment. Why did I listen to you and stay? We're strangers here. Did you see their outfits? So what? Kayla challenged, and we'll be just as good as them when we marry well. That's what we came here for. Hello, she said loudly, trying to draw attention to herself. John, who just now was bored and accepting the caresses of his girlfriend, immediately became animated when he noticed the girls. Who do I see? He got up from the sofa and walked towards them. Gentlemen, I would like to introduce my new acquaintances, Kayla and Emma. Girls, he hugged and pushed them to the table in the center of the room. Please drink to my birthday. He served both of them a glass of champagne. The guests became animated as well, reaching for their drinks, discussing the new arrivals. Kayla. A smiling Liam approached her. I don't think you're coming. She smiled back, and her eyes were filled with annoyance. Meanwhile, John had captured Emma's attention. We couldn't miss such a great party. Shall we go dancing? Begging, looking at the girl, Liam asked. I missed you. They stepped into the circle. He hugged her and began to whisper some silly things, but Kayla didn't listen. She tried not to let John out of her sight. Emma, I'm happy you didn't run home, he said playfully, sitting her down next to him on the couch. And then I would have had to chase after you. You're not used to being turned down, are you? Right. He laughed, revealing a row of straight white teeth. I'll tell you a secret. I always get what I want. You think the whole world should be at your feet. What can you do? He faked a sigh. I was born with a golden spoon in my mouth. My mom calls me a fortunate man. Nothing is off limits to me but you. He whispered right into her ear. Emma felt goosebumps running down her skin from his touch. But I hope you will relent and pay attention to me. I have a fiancé. We're getting married soon. The girl reminded him, moving away from him. I know. The young man waved his hands at her. But the fiancé is far away, and I'm right here. He took the glass from her and ceremoniously invited her to dance. Relax, John demanded. Look at the fun everyone's having here. Don't you know how to relax? He pulled her against him, ran his hot hands down her back. Stay with us, he asked. Why go back to the village? I like you, the kind of woman I've always dreamed of. quiet, calm, made for a family. My father will be pleased. He does not like languid, brash girls from my neighborhood. He wants someone like you by my side. I'm sorry." Emma gently slipped out of his arms. "I'm tired. Let's sit down." "Okay." John released her from his embrace and led her over to the table. "I'll bring you some wine you've never had before." "Thank you. I don't want any." "No, no, no. This wine you must try, at least a sip." He waved and a waiter appeared with a tray in his hand. John took a glass, swirled the clear liquid, and handed it to Emma. "First smell the aroma, and then take a sip. Hold it in your mouth for a while. Taste it." Emma accepted the glass and took a sip. "It's nice," she agreed. "I'm glad you like it. It's an expensive wine. We order it specially from France for special occasions." "Wow." The girl marveled, savoring the drink. "It must be insanely expensive." "Well, my dad can afford to please the family sometimes. Such wines. My birthday is worth it. My father never spares anything for me. I almost never know refusal." "Drink up," the man asked. "That's the custom for a birthday." Having drained almost the whole glass, Emma suddenly felt unpleasant dizziness. Her legs suddenly became disobedient. Her thoughts became confused. "Something doesn't feel right." Stopping at each word, the girl said, "Take me to the ladies' room, please." She followed John with a firm step. The girl remembered exactly how she had entered the bathroom to wash and tidy up, and then it was as if she had fallen into darkness. She heard some sounds, realized that someone was leading her somewhere, as if in a fog. John's face appeared and disappeared. She woke up to someone caressing her, covering her face with kisses, murmuring something affectionately. Jack. The first thought flashed through her mind. But why would Jack be here? She opened her eyes, gazing up at whoever was trying to get under her clothes, and froze in horror. "John?" Her arms didn't listen well. There was a strange lethargy in her whole body, but Emma started to resist. "John, what are you doing?" With disobedient lips she spoke. "Stop it, let me go." "Emma!" passionately whispered the man, running his hand under her blouse and caressing her breasts. With his other hand he tried to pull down her panties. "You're so sweet. I want you right now." Finally, he managed to pull her under him. Emma's eyes darkened with sharp pain. "Am I your first man?" John laughed throatily. "That's never happened to me before." "Baby, I'll show you what a real man can do." Emma cried, but the man remained deaf to her tears. John loosened his grip, and the girl managed to get out of his embrace and stand up, but she felt dizzy. Her head was buzzing, and she headed for the door. John caught up with her, knocked her to the floor. "Oh, how passionate you are." I knew that behind the outward calmness, there was a storm of emotion. "Relax. Let's give each other unforgettable pleasure." "Leave me alone." The girl screamed. "Why are you doing this? You know I'm getting married soon, and we won't say anything to your fiancé. But we're having a good time. Why is my head so foggy? What was in that glass?" She pulled away from him again, trying to get to her feet. "I guess I miscalculated this time. You came to your senses too soon." The young man came closer to her. "But I'm not used to backing down." "But I'm not used to retreat. I assure you, you will not regret. No one has not complained." "Stay. I'll pay you well later." "Just one night. I haven't had..." Emma's escape was noticed only by Kayla, who rushed after her. "Emma!" She called out to her already in the yard. "Where are you going?" The girl stopped abruptly and turned to her friend. "What? What's wrong with you? You're not even wearing your face." "Kayla!" Emma clutched at her arm and spoke in a broken whisper. "Kayla, honey, I killed him." "Who?" Kayla stared at her dumbfounded. "John." Emma burst into tears. "He spiked my wine. I blacked out for a while, and when I woke up I realized he was trying to rape me." "What are you making up?" "Why would he do that?" "He knew I wouldn't willingly go to bed with him." Crying, Emma replied, "What was I supposed to do?" He raped me. I started to break free and hit him on the head with a vase." "Let's go and have a look. Maybe he's still alive?" "No. I killed him for sure," shouted Emma. "Shut up, stupid." Kayla clamped her mouth with the palm of her hand and looked around fearfully. "Do you realize what you've done? Do you know who his father is? He's going to bury us in concrete for his son. What do we do? Pull yourself together right now. She told me to. Did anyone see you outside his bedroom?" "I don't think so." "That's good. Then let's get out of here right now. No one will notice we're gone. They won't be interested in us. Get in the car. I'll take you to the dorm." The girls hurried to the parking lot. "We can't drive." Emma tried to stop her friend. "We've both been drinking. What if something happens? And it's Liam's car. How are we going to get into it?" "Don't worry," Kayla answered confidently. She took her keys out of her purse and waved them in front of her friend's nose. "I have a spare set, and I'm a good driver, Liam taught me." No, you can't risk it." "Let's call a cab. There's no time to wait. We've got to get out of here before someone misses us." "You don't want to go to jail, do you?" Emma shook her head fearfully. "I'll take you and go back to the party. No one will notice I'm gone. Everyone there is in the same state of mind that no one cares about anyone else. I'll just pretend I went out for some fresh air. You'll have time to pack up and get out of town, especially with the tickets in hand. Don't argue, sit down," Kayla commanded, opening the car. No one really noticed their escape except Liam. He was just standing there smoking. He had a clear view of the courtyard through the window. He noticed Emma's frightened face, her crumpled hair, and thought, "John Fool, he'll have to answer for raping girls someday. Somebody will come along and want to punish him, if not with jail, then with his wallet. Where are they going? Driving in that condition, are they crazy?" The young man rushed after the girls, but when he ran out into the yard, the car was already speeding down the road away from the country house. "Kayla, don't drive, please." Emma looked anxiously at the wet asphalt. The rain was beginning to drip. "Everything will be fine. Don't worry. We don't have much time if we want to go unnoticed. My long absence might alert the guests. What if someone else misses John? They could put 2 and 2 together, and then we're dead. So hold on tight. Kayla!" Emma shrieked as the car skidded slightly around a bend. "Please slow down. We're going to crash." "Don't talk under your arm," snarled her friend. "I know what I'm doing. The asphalt is wet. It's raining. The wipers can't handle it. I beg you, don't rush. I'm scared. I'm scared," Kayla joked. She turned her head toward her friend, just a split second, but at that moment an oncoming car emerged from the wall of rain. The girl turned the wheel sharply to get into her lane. The car jerked. One wheel slipped off the asphalt. Kayla tried to level the car, but it suddenly became uncontrollable. The headlights caught a huge tree out of the darkness. "Kayla, hold on." Emma saw the trunk of the tree instantly appear in front of them, followed by a sudden impact, and the car stood up. The clinking of glass, the sharp pain. Everything went black in Emma's eyes. She could hear the car horn blaring a harsh, one-note roar. "Kayla," she called under her arm in the total darkness, but she was silent. "Kayla, don't scare me. Say something." The voices had gotten a little used to the darkness. She fumbled for her friend's shoulder, shook it. Kayla's head fell limply off the steering wheel, her body hanging from the belt. There was a ringing silence in her ears, the rain pounding fractionally on the roof of the car. With fear, Emma couldn't utter a word. "Kayla!" Again she called out to the girl. When it reached Emma that Kayla was dead, she passed out. Emma came to her senses from the cold. The rain had ended, and the sky had brightened. What am I supposed to do? She looked helplessly at her friend's disfigured, blood-soaked face. The blow had hit Kayla's side, and her body was disfigured. There was blood everywhere, shards of glass and mangled metal. "Kayla, what happened? How am I going to get home now? They're probably looking for us by now." Emma cried, her head hurting. It hurt. She touched her forehead with her hand. "Blood? Mine or Kayla's? I have to get out of here." She tried to get out of the car, but couldn't. The door was jammed. What am I going to do? Smearing her tears with blood, she cried out to the sky. "Jack's waiting for me at home, and I'm here. They'll find us, and then I'll have to answer for John's death." Emma tried to get out again, but gave up, leaned back against the seat, and closed her eyes. Kayla. Suddenly, a thought flashed through her mind, a crazy thought. "Forgive me, but this is the only way I can avoid jail." With shaking hands, the girl took the engagement ring off her ring finger and put it on Kayla's finger. Then she put the documents from her purse into her friend's bag and waited for help. If the deception is discovered, she thought with a shudder, "I'll be labeled a criminal twice, but this is my only chance to stay free. No one will realize Kayla died, not me. And the parents?" She imagined how her mother would take her death so hard. "I'd rather have one funeral than accept the shame of my crime." I imagine the locals will be discussing my incarceration. "Mom won't survive." No, it's settled. I'll just disappear forever. This is my chance to stay out of jail, and I'll take it and save my parents the embarrassment." She leaned back again, closed her eyes, clenched her teeth tightly, telling herself not to chicken out, not to be cowardly. Emma didn't know how much time had passed since the accident, when suddenly she heard the approaching howl of a siren. People were already running towards them. It was too late to retreat. The girl lost consciousness again. "Kayla, can you hear me?" The girl came to her senses from the pungent smell of ammonia. "Kayla?" It was a flash in her head. "So Kayla's alive?" No. She stopped herself. "Kayla, it's me." "Open your eyes. Can you speak?" "Yes." In a hoarse voice, Emma said slowly, "Thank God." The doctor breathed a sigh of relief. "You'll be fine. No serious injuries. We'll go to the hospital and get an MRI. You have a concussion, but I think it's nothing serious. We'll keep you in the hospital for a couple days for observation, and then we'll let you go. No fractures, just bruises. You're very lucky." He didn't say much. "But your friend is dead. Can you give me her parents' phone number to let them know what happened?" "Yeah, write it down." "I remember their number." She dictated the phone number of her parents. Emma was pounding, wanted to scream and repent for the forgery, but she restrained herself. The fear of going to jail was stronger than reason. Tears rolled from her eyes. "It's all right. Just cry." The doctor patted her hand reassuringly. "I know it's hard to lose someone close to you. If you only knew." Emma thought, "I didn't just lose a loved one. I lost myself." Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Kayla's body being carried on a stretcher, covered by a white sheet. She tried to get up, but was stopped. "Stay down. You can't get up." "Bob?" The paramedic commanded, closing the car door. "Come on, what are you standing there for?" Hit the horn. The cemetery was crowded. What a young man. Friends and acquaintances of John were talking quietly. The father's angry. He said he'd find out who killed his son. Only child in the family, poor parents. I wonder why they did that to him. I know why. I should have spoiled the girls less, but I guess some girl got revenge. What are you talking about? It's not true. I know what I'm saying. Every time he has a party, he has another young fool in bed. They say he puts sleeping pills in the girl's wine glass, or maybe something worse, so they don't fight back. How do you know that? Yeah, I had a complaint, and no one went to the police. What's the point? His daddy's got the money to do the impossible. Quiet. They shouted at the people talking. Have you forgotten where you are? Have some respect for your parents' grief. My boy! The grief-stricken father said goodbye to his son. I swear I'll do everything I can to make sure the murderer is punished. I will avenge your death. I didn't raise you so that some bastard could take your life with impunity. Sleep well. Rest assured, I won't let that bastard walk free for long. Friends, he addressed the crowd. If anyone has seen or heard anything, let me know. For the sake of my son's memory, your friend, help me find the culprit. Liam silently bade farewell to his friend, placed flowers on the fresh grave mound, approached his parents. I'm sorry for your loss. He bowed to his grief-stricken mother's hand, shook his father's hand. Liam, you are his closest friend. You were by his side all the time. Can you remember minute by minute what happened that night? Okay, I'll try. The man returned home, brewed some coffee, and sat down in a cozy chair in the living room. Definitely Kayla and Emma knew something. Too quickly they left the party for good reason. Kayla had been in the lounge the whole time, which meant Emma had stayed with John. Makes sense. He reasoned. He'd liked her at first sight. Could he seduce her? He could. Nothing had ever stopped him, not even that country girl's fiancé. They drove off in my car together. Emma's dead. So we need to find Kayla. But there's something strange about this case. Liam's been thinking. How come Emma was behind the wheel? Why did Kayla give up the driver's seat? Something's not right here, but I can't figure out what it is. Kayla could clear things up, but she disappeared from the hospital without a trace, and no one knows where to find her. Okay, I'll call my police contact tomorrow, see if he can track her down. I'd like to know who's gonna pay for my car repairs. Anyway, there's nothing to repair. I have to find her anyway. The next day, Liam gave his friend all the information about Kayla, who promised to help. A week went by, another week went by, and the police were stalled, like she'd fallen through the cracks, justified by the acquaintance. The last time she was seen in the dormitory, she packed her things, took her documents from the institute, and disappeared. No one saw her again. Did some girl really stump the experienced detectives? Liam was angry. So far, no information about her had been obtained. The police had their hands full. Wait, as soon as there is news, we'll inform you. We sent her coordinates to all police stations, hospitals, morgues. She couldn't have traveled far. I don't think so. The young man said doubtfully. She's got a lot of money. Here, and the nearby settlements, we'd have under vigilant control. Your beauty is not going anywhere. I think she'll lay low for a while, and then she'll come out of the shadows. Be patient. Liam waited, but Kayla did not appear. Doris sighed sorrowfully, wiping her tear-stained eyes. Don't cry, Mother. It can't be helped. It's our daughter's fate. Eric corrected the mourning ribbons on the wreaths, put a few carnations on the fresh grave. Tears roll down my eyes when I think that I will never see my daughter again. Why should we suffer such grief in our old age? What were we not to the Almighty? She took our little girl to heaven, but she died a terrible death. Kayla, her friend, has disappeared too. 6 months since Emma's been gone, and she hasn't been home. Why did fate do such an injustice to her? Kayla, such a tomboy, is alive, and our daughter, quiet, intelligent, shy, is lying in a damp grave. God forbid anyone should bury their children. Come on, Mother, don't worry your soul. We have to settle down slowly. I'd like to see Kayla and ask her about the accident. Emma couldn't have driven someone else's car. She was taught to rely on herself for everything in life. I don't know. I still can't believe I'll never see her on the doorstep again. Never come to ask her how she's doing, Mommy. They shaved slowly toward the house. Look, Father, someone has grief and someone has fun. From afar, hearing the sound of merry music, Doris said. So it's Jack who's getting married. He didn't suffer long without Emma. And what a love affair it was. He's quickly forgotten it. Don't blame him. He's a young man. What's he got to do to be single for the rest of his life? He should have waited 6 months for decency, or before he came back from the army, he got married. Not his idea, but his mother's, who never liked our daughter. She's probably glad her son's marrying someone else. They passed Jack's house. Cheerful, tipsy guests were dancing in the street to the winding music. The happy newlyweds were accepting congratulations. Look who he married. Emma's mom was surprised. On his classmate, the village is notorious for her. That's their business, but we don't care now who he married. The elderly people passed by, trying not to look in the direction of the guests, whose faces shone with joy. They went into their house. How quiet it is. Father remarked, "It seems as if the door is about to slam, and Emma will come in." The woman, crying, came to the table, on which stood a framed photograph of a smiling daughter. The mother took it in her hands, held it on the glass. "How much we miss you, my daughter. Sit down, Mother." Taking a bottle of wine out of the refrigerator, the father spoke. "Let's remember Emma." The old men sat down, drank in silence, cried with their gray heads down. The longing for their daughter, the loneliness, was already making itself felt. Emma walked around the apartment and collected things for the maternity hospital. She was already in labor, but she knew how to behave, so she tried not to lose her temper. There was no one to help her. She was moving with difficulty, holding her big belly with one hand. "I've managed to get by without documents all this time, but they won't let me into the maternity hospital without a passport," she reasoned, pulling out her dead friend's documents. "I hope it'll be over quickly, as long as no one's looking for me." "Okay." She sat down on the edge of the chair. "Time to call an ambulance. Go to the hospital. I can't give birth here." A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived. They didn't ask any questions in the emergency room and sent her straight to the prenatal room. "Well, Mommy?" The midwife gave her a friendly smile. "What are we going to give birth to?" "A boy." Emma said glumly, writhing in pain, "Why don't I see any joy on your face?" The midwife asked again, helping the woman in labor onto the table. "What is there to be happy about?" "I hate my baby. It shouldn't even be here. You're suffering from prenatal depression," the nurse said confidently. "It happens to first-time moms. The baby's gonna come out now, and you're gonna be fine. Come on, help him into the world." Emma screamed with pain, but tried to follow all the midwife's commands. When everything was over and she was brought to the room, the woman lay with her eyes open for a long time, listening to her body. "I'm finally rid of him," she thought. A nurse entered the room, checked the condition of the woman who had given birth, dimmed the light in the room, adjusted the blanket, and said, "Rest for now. Soon your son will be brought to you for feeding." "I will not feed him." Emma said firmly. "What kind of news is that?" The girl was surprised. "I don't want that baby." "How can you say that? It's your baby, your most dear person." "I don't need it. I didn't want it. I was just too late with the abortion." "Tell the head doctor I want to write a refusal." "Are you crazy?" "I'm not naming anyone." "Get some rest, and we'll talk tomorrow. I'll ask the mom to feed your baby, and you get the hell out of your head. Even if things didn't work out with the father, it's not the baby's fault." Emma turned away from the talkative nurse, showing that she had her own opinion. She had already decided everything for herself, and she wasn't going to change anything. The woman breathed a sigh of relief, having gotten rid of the problem that had been plaguing her for 9 months. Congratulations. She remembered the doctor's words. "You're going to be a mom soon." "No way," Emma exclaimed, gasping in horror. She had so hoped that her accidental intimacy with John, against her will, would end with only unpleasant memories of that unfortunate day. But the miracle had not happened. The seed of the man who raped her sprouted. "You're not going to have an abortion, are you?" the doctor asked worriedly. "I am. This child is not the fruit of love. But for you, an abortion could have undesirable consequences. The time frame is long enough, you could be infertile forever. You'll have to give birth. Maybe in the meantime you'll grow to love your baby." Such thoughts appear in many first-time mothers, and then it passes. "It's not my case. I don't need a baby. I'm not happy about it. However, I can always leave him in the hospital." Now, lying alone in the room, Emma remembered how she had cried with resentment after the doctor's visit. Everything was going great for her. She got a job right away. No one asked her for documents. Life was starting to get better. She expected to sit out for a while and then find a way to inform her parents about herself. And here, thoughts swarmed in her head. Memories kept her awake, and somewhere deep in her heart, there was anxiety. Emma was worried for a reason. She didn't realize that Liam was already on her trail. Liam? The same day Emma was admitted by ambulance, a young man answered the phone. "A friend of yours has come forward. Where is she?" "He's awake." "In the hospital. They brought her in today. I'll text you the address." "How in the hospital?" He was surprised. "Is she pregnant?" "By whom? But that's for you to know." The man on the other end of the line laughed. The man immediately quickly got ready, got in his car, and went to the address the acquaintance had given him. He was in a hurry. He was curious to see who he would actually see. "Hello." He turned to the nurse on duty. "A friend of mine was brought in by ambulance today." Liam said Kayla's last name. "Yes, she came in with a baby boy." "Can I take a look at her?" "I want to make sure it's her and not her namesake." "Not allowed." The nurse replied sternly. "This is a maternity ward, not a modeling agency. You should understand. If you are noticed, I can be fired." "I'm begging you." The man looked at her pleadingly and at the same time, as if unintentionally, pushed the woman a bill. "Okay." Quickly shooting her eyes around, the nurse slipped the bill into her pocket, adjusted her medical cap, stood up from behind the counter, and handed the named visitor a robe. "Come with me." "It's lucky that we arrived in the evening. During the day, I would never have risked to enter the ward. There are children there." "Here she is." The woman nodded at the young mother sleeping peacefully in the bed. "No," Liam said, looking disappointedly at Emma. "It's not her. I'll go to another maternity hospital." He got back in the car. "I knew it." Emma couldn't have been behind the wheel. So she killed John and took advantage of the situation and switched documents to escape justice. The man was thinking, "No, honey, it doesn't work that way. You're a criminal and a liar. I must inform John's father. Hopefully, he will find a way to thank me for finding his son's killer." With these thoughts, Liam dialed the right number, James. He spoke as his father's sad voice came through the phone. "I have news about John's death." "Hello, Liam. What news can you tell me?" "It's been a year since your friend's death, and the killer is still walking free." "I don't think he has long to enjoy it." The young man chuckled. "I found him. Or rather, her." "Who?" James asked impatiently. "John's killer, an acquaintance of mine who died in an accident, brought her friend Emma to the party." "Emma died, didn't she?" "Looks like we were wrong. The thing is, the girls are very similar on the outside, but on the inside, they're almost complete opposites. John liked Emma, quiet and modest on the outside. What happened between them, I can't say, but she was the one who dealt the fatal blow to your son. Kayla helped to avoid, but the accident made a difference. Emma switched IDs with my girlfriend and fled the scene under a false name. I suspected forgery, but I needed proof. You wouldn't believe my crazy idea, but today I saw Emma with my own eyes, the perpetrator. So that's how it is. I could strangle her with my own hands, but I won't. I'll beat a confession out of her. Not by myself, of course. I don't want to get my hands dirty with that scum. My lawyers will do everything they can to put her away for a long time. She can't get away with it now. She doesn't know who she's messing with yet. No one's ever been able to fool me before. My revenge will be terrible." "Liam, where can we find her?" "She's in the maternity ward." "In the maternity ward?" The man was surprised. "She works there?" "She just had a baby yesterday." Liam paused. "Wouldn't you like to know whose baby it is?" He asked practically. "I'm not interested in knowing." The man replied impatiently. "Who she gave birth to her bastard child." "I don't fight with children, but the mother will go to jail anyway. It's your grandson." "What?" James shouted. "If this is a joke, you'll pay dearly for it. It won't even help that you found that Emma for me. I suspect that on that fateful night, John slept with her. You don't know what caused the quarrel. You know your son best. Don't get off the subject." His father, disturbed by the news, interrupted him impatiently. "We both know how John lured the girls into bed, but even this fact does not justify the murderer. She committed a crime and should be punished." "I agree." Liam spoke peacefully. "Well, Emma is probably pregnant, and if you hurry up you can see your grandson before she runs away again. Are you sure he's John's son?" "I'm sure. Emma's fiancé was in the army at the time. She was expecting him in 2 months to get married. She wouldn't cheat willingly. If that's the case." Liam heard James breathing heavily with excitement. "Am I going to have to orphan my own grandson?" "But you can raise him yourself," the young man said curtly. "But how? She's a mother. To take a child away from its mother?" No, I can't. But she took your only son from you. Did she not think what it would be like for you to lose a child? This boy, it's an extension of John. Yes, his baby. You're right. I'll take her son away from her. Let her feel on her own skin how painful it is to be left without a child, when your heart bleeds an unhealed wound, when your soul hurts at the thought that you will never again hear your own voice, never look into your eyes, when it seems that God has turned away from you." "I'm sure." Liam spoke ingratiatingly. "God is on your side. You have the right to raise your child yourself. What could a murderer give his son?" "You're right. You're absolutely right." "I will not allow my grandson to live next to a criminal." I'll go and get the child right now. There's no pity for her. Tell me how to find her." Liam dictated the address and the name Emma was hiding under. "Liam," said sadly James, "you're a good friend, thank you. When the baby is in my house, and it is confirmed that he is indeed John's heir, I will thank you generously. If you want, I can offer you a good monetary position in my firm." The man couldn't see how Liam blushed with pleasure, satisfied that he was able to please such an influential person. "Thank you. I would be happy to work for you," he replied, trying to hold back the joy that was about to burst out. Meanwhile, Emma's discharge had already arrived. She was packing her things when the midwife who had delivered her came into the room. "Emma, I'm told you've written a waiver?" "Yes, don't try to talk me into it. I've made up my mind." The young woman spoke calmly. She tried to close her heart to doubts about the rightness of the act. "You mustn't do this. He's your son. Don't you feel sorry for him? Can't someone else love him the way you do? I don't know what happened with his father, but it's not the kid's fault. There will be many other men in your life. They will lie that they love you and betray you at the worst possible moment, and only your son will never betray you and will love you simply because you are a mom. Very soon he will learn to recognize you. Then he will say his first word. Do you know what it is? Mommy, listen to your heart. Doesn't it hurt? Doesn't it tell you to stop? Don't make a mistake." Emma sat up in bed with her head bowed. The first tear fell on her hand, then another. The woman sobbed. "Imagine how your little boy will cry alone when I embrace him, not the long-awaited arms of his mom, but the indifferent hands of someone else's aunt. Isn't that a shame? I can't believe you're so heartless." And then Emma burst into bitter tears. The midwife came up to her, stroked her head. "Cry, sweetheart, you'll feel better. You'll share all the difficulties now. From now on, you'll never feel lonely. Go to the head doctor's office, get a statement. Believe me, someday you'll thank me for talking you out of it, for stopping you. Thank you." Emma said through her tears, "I really almost made the biggest mistake of my life. But I don't even have clothes for him." She looked at the midwife in confusion. "We've collected some things for you in the ward, enough for the first time, and then you can buy whatever you think you need and take a small sum from me. I'm ashamed to take money from you. Take it, as long as everything works out well for you." Emma left the maternity hospital with a light heart. Happy, she walked out into the fresh air, holding her son to her chest. She stopped on the sidewalk, waiting for the cab that the receptionist girl had called for her. At that moment, a black, tinted Jeep stopped nearby. Two men in black suits grabbed the woman, took the child, and shoved her into the cabin. "Well, hello, Emma." Smiling sinisterly, James scrutinized the young mother. "You've made a mistake." In a trembling voice, she objected. "I'm not Emma. My name is Kayla. Who are you? What do you want from me?" "My name is James. I'm John's father." "Do you remember him?" Emma went cold. "I see you do. It's time to pay the bills. You robbed me of my son, and for that I will rob you of your son and your freedom. You dare not take my child from me." The woman jerked, trying to get out of the hands of the kidnappers. "No one will ask your permission." James answered calmly, "He's my grandson." "That's not true," Emma shouted, rushing toward her son. "He's mine. I think the genetic test will confirm my guess." The Jeep stopped. "What are you going to do to me?" "Don't worry, I won't kill you. It's not my profile. I will hand you over to the law enforcement agencies, and they will, according to the law, impose a fair punishment. I'll just try to make it as severe as possible." The door opened and Emma was dragged out of the car. "Don't touch me," she lashed out. screaming, kicking, but the men were relentless. "You monster! I have a small child. Have pity on me." The woman cried, holding out her arms to James. "Don't deprive the child of its mother, I beg you." "I am not touched by your tears," the man replied harshly. "Pity for the likes of you has cost me dearly. I will not rest until I hear the verdict of the court. At least let me say goodbye to my son." With all her strength, Emma begged. "See her, boys," James ordered. "You'll never see him again. I'll make sure he doesn't even remember you." Emma was taken to the investigator. The woman realized that she was doomed and there was no chance of salvation. She answered questions, indifferently obeyed police orders. In the cell, surrounded by her own kind, she kept silent all the time, forcing herself to resign herself to the inevitable. Well, a week later, the investigator reported, "We've prepared your case for the court. How much will they give me?" With a sinking heart, the woman asked. "I don't know what the maximum punishment the prosecutor will ask for, but I think you won't be free for the next 15 years. 15? Emma was horrified. "Well, he raped me. Why won't anyone believe me? Couldn't that fact be a mitigating factor?" I had to defend myself. "The birth of my son is proof that I'm telling the truth." "Did you tell your lawyer all this?" "I did." Tiredly, she whispered, "But he doesn't listen. He just keeps saying the same thing. It's been a long time. There are no witnesses. It's impossible to prove rape." And he's right. If you had not fled from the scene of the crime and passed the examination, the case could be considered from a different angle, but, unfortunately, you hurt yourself. And besides, the son of a very powerful man in our city is dead, and he will stop at nothing until he puts you in jail for a very long time. How could that be? Doesn't the law work? Alas, this man has people everywhere, even in the courts and the prosecutor's office. They work for him, he pays them, so you're in a bad position. There was no one in the courtroom except for those directly involved in the trial. James didn't show up either. He was represented by counsel. Court is now in session. The clerk announced loudly. Emma clung tightly to the bars of the iron grating, almost not listening to the body materials, but when the judge began to read out the verdict, turned into hearing. To impose a punishment of 20 years of general regime colony. How? 20 years? The woman screamed. I have extenuating circumstances. Why didn't the court take them into account? For what? She sobbed, looking at the participants of the process in a huff. I have a child. You can't send me to jail for so many years. You can't. You can't. And you have the right to appeal within 10 days. The secretary said the memorized phrase indifferently. Emma was led out from behind the courtroom. She walked, unable to feel her feet under her. When I get out, my son will be a grown man and will never forgive me. She thought as she got into the police car, he won't even know anything about me. James will probably say I'm dead. And me, I really am dead. I've been destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth. I did it all with my own hands. I am guilty before my parents, before my son, and there is no excuse for me. The woman looked through the dusty window of the car. Houses were passing by. People were walking by. They were laughing, talking about something, and for her life stopped for 20 years. The doors of the colony opened, and Emma stepped into freedom. Goodbye, she said to the guard. Goodbye. It's customary here to say goodbye, not to come back. I won't come back, I promise. She stopped, raised her head to the sky. It's different here, she thought. Huge, vast, and the sun shining down on her. Where are you going now? I'll go home, repent to my parents, maybe they'll forgive me. Parents always forgive their children. Emma got worried when the bus stopped and the driver said, "The end of the line." "Woman, do you hear that?" He addressed her. "The bus isn't going any further. Did you fall asleep in there?" "I'm sorry." She hurried away, waking up from her thoughts. Emma recognized and did not recognize her native village. It had changed, become more beautiful. Many new houses, even younger. She grinned. People are getting older, but the area is getting younger. It's an amazing phenomenon. The woman hesitantly stepped onto the porch of her house, grasped the handle, and the door creaked open. She walked down the familiar corridor and opened the door to the hallway, hesitated, trying to place a small travel bag on the floor. In the semi-darkness, she stepped on something, stumbled. The bag fell out of her hands and dropped to the floor with a thud. "Who's making a noise?" She heard her father's voice and stepped resolutely into the room. "What are you doing, sweetie?" "Is it necessary? Looking for someone?" I didn't recognize him. Emma's mind flashed. "Daddy," she said softly. "It's me, Emma." "Who?" Squinting his watery eyes, the old man came closer, putting his glasses on his nose with shaky hands. "It can't be. You're dead. We buried you 20 years ago." He reached out his hand, unable to believe his eyes. He ran his hand over her cheek, over her shoulder. How could it be? He slumped down on the chair next to him. "Where has it been all these years? Who did we bury then?" "Daddy." Emma rushed to her father, fell to her knees, grabbed his hands, and started kissing them. Tears choked her. "I'm so sorry. I'm so guilty before you, Mommy. I will tell you everything. You will understand that I could not have done otherwise. Just don't send me away. I need you so much. I miss you so much, my daughter." The old man finally believed that his daughter was alive. "Daughter, how can it be? All the years I thought you were dead, I went to your grave, but you're alive, alive and here with me. What joy is that?" He bent down and kissed her, as in childhood, on the top of her head. Laughing and crying at the same time, Emma hugged her father, kissed his unshaven cheek. "Where's Mom? Did she go to the store or is she at the neighbor's?" "Daughter." Wiping his tears, the father said sadly, "No, Mom. She died 10 years ago. When they buried you, she started to get sick, and then she went sick. She was very sad." "Daddy?" Emma clung to her father. "I'm so sorry for you. It's my fault that Mom died. Don't blame yourself. You can't bring your mother back. It's good that I came back. Now I'm not afraid to die. Why am I sitting here, you old fool?" He got up and fussed in the kitchen. "Sit down. I'll feed you now. You need to rest from the road." "Don't worry, Father." "Papa, I'm happy to be back home. You can't imagine how my heart ached for you. But I couldn't go back, believe me. Let's eat now, and then you can tell me all about it." After the bath, steamed, washed away by what seemed to be the weight of years spent behind bars, Emma felt an unaccustomed lightness in her whole body. She only now realized how tired she was, how much she missed the smell of her own home and her father's voice. Nothing had changed in the house since her disappearance. The woman was glad to plunge into familiar surroundings. I'd forgotten how nice it was here. She sat at the table, rested, relaxed. It's always nice at your parents' house, because you grew up here. "Daughter?" Her father looked at her questioningly. "Tell me, what happened to you?" Emma spoke. She was in a hurry to get rid of the unpleasant memories that had weighed heavily on her heart for so many years. "So I have a grandson?" Shaking his head thoughtfully, the old man asked. "But I don't think I'll ever get to meet him. James, I'm sure, described me to the boy as a monster. I don't think even if I tried to find him, he wouldn't want to talk to me. That's a shame. Dad sighed heavily. I'd like to see him before I die. Just one eye. No matter what happens, he's the continuation of our family. Don't hope for a reunion. It'll never happen. Why don't you ask me about Jack? Or have you forgotten him? I hope he's doing well. Unfortunately, he was unlucky with his wife. After he got back from the army, he hastily married a classmate. My mother and I always wondered how it was that he so quickly moved on to another, before your grave got cold. The father looked guiltily at his daughter. Oh, I'm sorry. It's all right, Dad. That's just the way it was. So, not much time has passed, and he's already taken someone else to the wedding. We were even offended. And it turned out that his mother had betrothed him. She didn't want him to feel sorry for you. She was afraid you wouldn't marry at all, suffering for you. And that girl was not a bad girl. She got pregnant right after the wedding, and the boy was born prematurely. Jack didn't like his wife much, but he was very fond of the boy. I'm glad for him. Emma said, and she felt a pang of jealousy in her heart, but she didn't let it show that she was unpleasant to hear about the happy family life of her former fiancé. He and his wife had divorced, abandoned by her father. Oh, the woman was surprised. How so? Jack and his son, and only 14 years later, it turned out that the child was not his at all. How come? And just like that, his wife, even before the wedding on a walk-it, with some stranger and hid from everyone, and then very fortunately Jack, suffering for the dead bride, turned up. So she took the opportunity to cover up the shame. Jack's mother liked her in school, and she didn't miss the opportunity to arrange her son's personal life, but she miscalculated. Jack, of course, could not forgive the betrayal of his wife and filed for divorce. But what about the child? It's not his fault that the mother is a cheat. Did Jack give up on him? His wife took the boy and left the village. They didn't forgive her for the deception. I remember walking through the village, and the women spit on her and laughed, making dirty jokes. I couldn't stand it, so I ran away. And Jack, where is he now? Jack. The old man sighed heavily. Since then, he's been drinking, he's been fired from his job, he's become a real recluse. His mother now complains to everyone that she broke her son's fate with her own hands. What's the use? The guy's gone downhill. I feel sorry for him. He walks around like a shadow. Doesn't talk to anyone. He buys vodka at the store and goes to his room. Doesn't want to see anyone. He's all alone. It was 2 days before Emma returned home. She tried to be in public less often. It was good to be unrecognized, so there was no need to explain her long absence and sudden resurrection. One evening, she was returning from the river. A tall, unkempt man walked toward her with a shuffling gait. His once good figure was now disfigured by a belly protruding unpleasantly from his jeans. Dark, long, uncut hair stuck out in all directions. His chin was overgrown with a week's worth of stubble, some of it gray. The features of his face, his brown eyes cloudy with alcohol, looked familiar to her. She approached the man and gave a startled gasp. Jack, it came out of Emma's mouth. Do I know you? He stopped, gazing into the stranger's face. Don't you recognize me? Jack shook his head negatively. I'm Emma. Dibs on me, dibs on me. The man waved his hands at her. Emma's gone. What do you want from me? I'm alive, Jack. Look closely. Don't you recognize her? Jack studied her face for a long time. With each passing minute, the look became more and more meaningful. Finally, an epiphany came. You? He exhaled. But you were buried 20 years ago. Where did you come from? Resurrected, or am I drunk, and already hallucinating. He joked cheerfully, "You've changed so much, I'd never have recognized you. You and I have both changed." She smiled warmly at her former lover. "Where I've been all these years is far from a sanatorium. We need to talk." The man stepped towards her and tried to hug her. The woman was overcome by the unpleasant odor of booze and unwashed body. "We'll definitely talk." Emma gently pulled away from him. "But not today, my father is waiting for me." "Come back tomorrow, just get yourself cleaned up." "I want to talk to the Jack I used to know." She went into her yard and closed the gate. "Why are you smiling?" her father asked her. "I met Jack. We didn't recognize each other right away. How is he? I didn't expect to see him like this." I think the woman smiled again. "We should expect guests tomorrow." Emma wasn't wrong. Toward evening, there was a not-so-bold knock on the door. "Come in, Jack." Emma invited him in, not doubting it was him. "How did you know it was me?" Entering the house, the man asked. "We weren't expecting anyone else but you." Emma answered simply, "Come to the table. We'll have dinner." She noticed how Jack had changed in just one day. Clean-shaven and cut, he looked fresher and even seemed younger to Emma. A light, loose shirt hid his belly. The wrinkles on his face smoothed out a little and the blue circles under his eyes disappeared. "You are unrecognizable," Emma's father remarked cheerfully. "All right, young people." He left the house. "I won't disturb you. You need to talk, and I'm going to visit an old friend. I haven't been there for a long time." "I barely waited for tonight," the man admitted, pulling out a small bouquet of flowers from behind his back. "I really wanted to see you." "Thank you." Emma blushed, accepting the flowers. She set them in a vase, her hands trembling with excitement. She didn't know where to start the conversation. "Jack." She turned sharply toward him. "I didn't mean to leave you." "I failed my institute exams and had already bought tickets home, but something happened. It's hard for me to talk about it. The circumstances were such that I couldn't come back. I couldn't tell you everything because I was afraid you'd hate me." "How could you think such a thing? How could I hate you?" "I thought you left me for a rich guy in the city. I didn't want to live at that moment. And then I find out you're dead. My mother's been bugging me about it. Get married." "Honestly, I didn't care who I married at the time. I have a son." Suddenly, Emma said, unexpectedly, even to herself, "But I've never seen him." And the woman told what had happened to her. They sat until dark and talked about how they had lived without each other all these years. "I don't want to leave." Jack spoke quietly when Emma's father returned from his visit. "I'm afraid you'll disappear again tomorrow." "I don't want to leave you either." The woman replied just as quietly. "But let's not rush things. We both need to think things over. But that doesn't mean we can't see each other. Let's try to start over, shall we?" "I agree." "Grandpa, how old is my mom now?" "Robert asked me once." "I don't know." James replied irritably. "Why do you want to know?" "That woman can't be called your mother. I forbade you even to think about her." "But why?" The young man was indignant. "Whatever you say about her, she is still my mother, and I want to meet her." "I forbid you to mention her name." The grandfather got angry. "Have you forgotten that she is your father's murderer? That's the only thing you should know about her. She committed a crime in cold blood and paid for it. Put her out of your mind. Do something more useful. Pay attention to your studies." "You never say anything about her when her sentence is up?" "I don't know exactly, but I think it's the other day." James shrugged. "Why don't we go to the prison and find out more? In fact, I have to find out for myself. Make a date with her. You can do anything." only God can do anything, noted James. I won't let you see that criminal, but I want to find out why she killed my father. For a reason, what happened between them? Do you know? I don't know, and I don't want to know. Are you trying to make excuses for her? I'm not going to make excuses. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Shut up right now. Grandpa got angry. I forbid digging into the past. If it would help me get John back, I would do everything I could to get the truth out of Emma. But that's impossible. If that woman rots behind bars, I'll be glad. How can you say that? She's my mother. Yes, unfortunately. That's the only good thing she did. I love you, you're my grandson, but let's stop talking. She's dead to you. I don't want to hear about her anymore. Upset by the conversation with his grandson, James disappeared into the study, slamming the door loudly. If you don't want to talk about her, I'll find out. I just need to understand what happened. Why did the young woman commit murder? And no one can stop me. The next day, Robert overhears his grandfather talking to his lawyer and learns that Emma is already free. I have to find an address and meet her. The young man decided. Waiting until his grandfather left for the firm, he found among the documents the address of Emma, where she lived with her father. Without wasting a minute, he persuaded the driver to take him to the address. Robert looked with interest at the old wooden house, which had not been painted for a long time. The fence had swayed in several places, and there was a bright bed of flowers near the porch. "Young man, who are you looking for?" A middle-aged woman appeared on the porch. Pain lurked in her beautiful brown eyes. Above the bridge of her nose, there was a deep crease, and the corners of her lips were sadly pulled down. Her pale face, once quite handsome, was marred by bags under her eyes and a fine mesh of wrinkles. She was wrapped in an old down shawl, though it was warm outside. Robert looked at his mother in silence and did not know what to say, how to start the conversation. "Hello." Finally, he decided. "I'm very thirsty. Come inside. I'll make you drunk." The woman grinned. "Sit down." She pointed to a chair. "Why aren't you so brave? I haven't been to the village for 20 years. I don't know you young people." She handed me a glass of morsa. "Or are you a stranger?" "I am your son," quietly said the young man, putting an empty glass on the table. "Who?" Emma was stunned. "Is this a joke?" "No, I really am your son." He stared intently at the complete stranger who was his mother. "Why did you come here?" Emma couldn't stand. Her legs trembled. She sank down on the sofa. "Did your grandfather send you to make sure I was still alive?" "Grandfather doesn't know I'm here." "He doesn't." She glared at the man who called himself her son. "I want to know why you killed my father and why you gave up on me." "Why?" "All my life I've only heard one version, but I want to hear the other side. You sound like a lawyer. I am a future lawyer. It's a good profession. Then I'll answer your question without beating around the bush. Your father, he raped me by putting sleeping pills in my wine glass." "Raped you how?" "My grandfather said you got him into bed, and then you wanted to cash in, but it didn't work out. James tricked you. I had no way to defend myself. The sleeping pills took effect immediately, and when I woke up, it was already done. I almost freaked out when I realized what had happened, and I wanted to get away, but John held me back. So I hit him with the first thing I could find, a vase on the head. I didn't mean to kill him. It was an accident. I was scared. I was just a girl, a naive, trusting fool. I paid for it. He fell in love with you. You must have been beautiful when you were young. Everyone's pretty when they're young. That might be an excuse for someone else, but not for John. He's used to taking whatever he likes without asking permission. I'm not the first victim. It's just that no one could fight back, but I could. There was no talk of love. The next day, I had to go to my fiancé, whom I was waiting for from the army. John found out that I wouldn't give myself to him willingly. I told him right away. Jean ruined my life, but I really didn't want to kill him. Emma was silent. She was watching the young man closely. Handsome. A woman, she thought. Strong. James hadn't spoiled him like a son. Kind, naive, like me at his age. Will he believe me? What's your name? Robert. Grandpa said you wanted to leave me at the hospital. It's true. She saw her son jerk as if he'd been hit, so she hurried to explain. But only at first, because you're not the product of loving parents, and then I came to my senses, and we left the hospital together. But James separated us. He sent me to prison and took you to his house. Believe me, the woman said quietly, if I'd been able to sneak out of the hospital, I would never have left you. A lot of things wouldn't have happened in your life. Your grandmother would still be alive, and your grandfather, my father, would have taught you simple earthly joys. You wouldn't have had the luxuries of life, but you wouldn't have lacked love. Grandfather warned me you'd make excuses, convince me you were innocent. I don't believe you. I understand James, too. I realize he lost his only son. I have no reason to lie. I have paid too dear a price for my crime. The woman was silent. I'm glad you found me. She confessed, tears glistening in her eyes. Even in her wildest dreams, she dared not hope to meet you. I have to go. Robert stood up abruptly. Of course. Wiping away her tears, Emma followed. I realize you're an adult, and I'm a stranger to you, but I want you to know. For 20 years, I've been thinking about you, imagining you growing up. Thinking about you kept me alive behind bars. If you ever forgive me and want to come back, remember you're loved here. Robert stood for a moment, staring intently into his mother's eyes. Did he read what he wanted? The woman didn't know. The young man walked resolutely out of the house without another word. At the door, he almost collided with Emma's father. The man looked at him in surprise. Who is this young man? Asked the old man. This is your grandson, Robert. Smiling through her tears, Emma replied. Robert returned and closed himself in his room. His thoughts were confused. How could it be? He wondered. His grandfather had painted her as a murderer, but it turned out she was the victim. What if his mother was lying? Doubts tormented him. I don't know her at all. It doesn't seem like it. He sat up abruptly on the bed, ran his fingers through his hair, and sat like that, replaying the conversation with his mother in his head. She didn't seem to be after money. She sounded sincere. I could see she was worried about what had happened. Either she's a great actress or... Robert jumped to his feet and paced from corner to corner. So then my grandfather deliberately convinced me all these years that my mother was a cold-blooded, unscrupulous criminal. Forbade me from seeing her so I wouldn't find out the truth. Robert had been thinking for days that something had not been told to him all these years. He grew gaunt, didn't sleep well at night. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. I must talk to him. The young man headed resolutely to the office, where after work, James looked through the documents. Grandpa, answer one question for me. Can it wait? Without lifting his head from the papers, the man asked. No, I need you to answer right away. Okay. Leaning back in his chair, James spoke. I'm listening. Did you know that my father raped Emma? Who told you? The man tensed, sitting up sharply in his chair. I saw my mother. What the hell? James shrieked and jumped to his feet. I forbade you to see her. You disobeyed me. Wasn't that why you forbade it? so I wouldn't find out the truth." "What truth?" Grandfather was getting hot. "The truth is that she took your father's life. It doesn't matter why she did it. There is no excuse, do you understand? There's no excuse for her." "But why?" "Grandfather, she was defending herself." "Don't you dare. I don't want to hear anything more about her. She's a criminal, period." "You didn't answer the question, Grandpa." Robert could barely keep from screaming at him. "Did you know that your father periodically raped girls in your country house? They would jump into his bunk all by themselves." James gasped with indignation. Everyone wanted to marry him because he was the son of rich parents. No one dragged them there by force, and not one complained that he was rude. "My mother had a fiancé. You see, she was going to get married, and my father abused her. He felt like it. He was hoping to get away with it again, and my mother decided to say no. So he's the perpetrator. Don't you dare sully the memory of my son." The man coughed. Tears welled up in his eyes. He was a good boy, a great son. James suddenly stopped talking, stared at his grandson with a frozen look, and clutched at his heart. "Grandfather!" Robert cried out wildly and rushed to the man, helping him to lie down on the couch. "Grandfather, be patient. I'll call an ambulance. Just don't die. Hello, ambulance, come here. The man is sick." The ambulance came quickly. The doctor examined the patient, frowned, and said briefly, "In the hospital urgently, a massive heart attack. We'll do everything we can, but hope for the best." Robert spent the night at his grandfather's bedside. He berated himself for his intemperance. "It was my fault." He confessed to the doctor. "If I hadn't started the argument, everything would have been all right." "Don't blame yourself," the doctor reassured him. "Your grandfather has had heart problems for a long time." The conversation was the last straw that triggered the attack. Not today, so tomorrow, it would have happened anyway. The young man stood at the window and looked at the street. He felt madly sorry for his grandfather. Robert. Suddenly he heard the faint voice of James. Abruptly he looked around and rushed to him. "Grandpa? Grandpa, are you awake? You scared me." The young man smiled. "Robert, I want you to bring Emma to me." The old man coughed harshly, closed his eyes, his chest heaved. "I don't have long. I want to talk to her." "Hurry up, please. Grandfather, can't we wait until you're well?" Robert asked cautiously. "I don't have time to wait." James said slowly, struggling to catch his breath. "Go now, you have to get there in time. And if she doesn't, convince her. Promise whatever you want, but bring her to me." Robert left immediately for the village, drove to a familiar house, quickly ran up to the porch, knocked and entered the room. "Robert?" Emma was surprised to see him. "I didn't expect you back. Something wrong?" The woman asked him sympathetically, noticing the pain on his face. "Yes, it's bad with my grandfather. I'll tell you everything on the way. Get ready. He asked you to come." "Why?" Emma was puzzled. "What does he want from me?" "I'm not going to claim anything. Don't ask me anything." Begging, looking at his mother, Robert asked. "Let's just go. He doesn't have long to go. I'm afraid I won't make it. I think he's going to say something very important." Emma looked at her son confusedly, then quickly pulled herself together. "I'm ready to throw my purse over my shoulder," she muttered. They cautiously entered the room. There, covered with tubes, on white sheets, lay James. He had aged overnight, shrunken somehow. His hands lay lifelessly on top of the sheets. "Grandfather!" Robert called softly to him. "We're here." James slowly opened his eyes and focused on Emma. You didn't refuse to come to a dying man? He grinned. Are you triumphant that your enemy has been defeated? James, if you've called me to exercise my sarcasm, I'd better go. All right, no offense. He didn't say anything. I called to apologize for my son. Robert told me everything. But I want to hear from you. Is it true that John raped you? Yes, Emma answered calmly. It's true. It's my fault I've never known rejection for anything. It's true, Robert. John ruined your life. I didn't want to believe it. I thought you were just as greedy as all his girlfriends. But you're different. If you can, I'm sorry. Also, I want to thank you for your grandson. He's a good kid, persistent, fair. He's like you in that way. Next to him, I lived the happiest years of my life and always worried about how he will be alone. And now my soul is calm. You are next to him. The old man closed his eyes and fell silent. Emma thought he had fallen asleep. She looked at her son understandingly, but James spoke again. Robert will receive a huge inheritance. There are bound to be people around who want to cheat him. Help him not to get lost. Promise? I promise, if he lets me. The woman answered, and you too, forgive me. James held out his hand, and Emma shook it gently. Robert approached them and put his hand in hers. The three of them held hands until the doctor arrived. You better go. He's very weak. Let him rest. Yes. Grandpa closed his eyes again. I'm tired. You go. Emma and Robert went outside together. You will be taken home. The young man turned away from his mother to hide the tears in his eyes. Robert, you can address me on a first-name basis, she asked. Okay. I'm not used to it yet. I understand, and I'm not rushing you. You need to be alone. Too much has happened in the last few days. The young man walked his mother to the car, opened the door, helping her to get in, raised his hand, saying goodbye. Quietly confused, she returned home. Daughter, are you all right? You don't look like yourself. Her father greeted her worriedly. She went somewhere without telling me. I went to the hospital. James is dying. She looked tiredly at her father. Can you believe he apologized to me and thanked me for my grandson? Emma shuddered when the phone rang in the evening, her heart throbbing unpleasantly. Grandpa had died. She heard the phone ring. Robert? The woman's voice trembled. Should I come over? How are you alone? Or you could come to our house and meet your grandfather. Not today. She heard a voice trembling with tears. You can come any time you hear, Robert. You're welcome. Good. There was silence for a moment. Mom. Emma stood crying. A pitiful beeping could be heard in the receiver. She couldn't tear herself away from it. What is it? Father asked impatiently. James is dead. Dad, she looked at her father, her eyes wet with tears. Robert called me Mom. The first time. How have I waited for this moment? It's okay, the old man reassured her. It'll work out. Think about it. You're a total stranger to him. Give the guy time. You have yet to really get to know each other, and the process will not be quick and difficult, painful, but you have so much time ahead of you.
Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
It's nice when childhood friends have the same kind of life. Michael thought as he drove to the restaurant where Charles was waiting for him. If Charles were less successful, what would they have to talk about? Rich people can't be friends with poor people, even if they want to. It doesn't work out. Envy interferes here, an involuntary demonstration of prosperity, and what is the worst of all is the realization that your friend, with whom you fished for moths in childhood, is a common lazy and weakling? Yes, Michael, by the time he was 35 years old, had acquired several unshakable beliefs. The first and most important of them said that poverty in 8 cases out of 10, the consequence of laziness and lack of character, but fortunately, all this was not about him and Charles. Each had risen in his own way. Michael ran his own contemporary dance theater. Charles' business was darker, but in the end, it was the one that would survive any crisis. Charles owned a funeral home. Yes, the festive atmosphere of the Michael Theater is not comparable, but it's also a necessary business. How can you stand it all? Michael once asked a friend. After all, every day you come to work, and there are coffins, morgue, makeup artists' dead makeup, and loved ones weeping in the ritual hall. That can make you depressed, can't it? Charles shrugged. Depressed? Maybe you can get depressed, but personally, I prefer to get philosophical. People die whether we want them to or not. So the employees do their best to see a person off with dignity and cause as little trouble to their loved ones as possible. They can mourn their loss in peace. Don't think it's better to be distracted. Then you won't feel the pain. First of all, lying, and secondly, pain is important to feel, Michael. You know how it often happens. A person drives his grief inside, tries to drown it out with troubles, and then bang, and the asylum. It's just as important to be able to grieve as it is to be able to rejoice. That's what I think. And we give those who have had such grief a chance to experience it without being distracted by things like finding a costume for the deceased, finding a makeup artist, or finding a place in the cemetery. After listening to his friend's speech, Michael didn't argue. There was nothing to argue about. Charles was right. It was just that not everyone could accept his almost philosophical truth. Just in case, Michael decided not to talk to his friend any more about his work. After all, they had enough to talk about. Charles was waiting for him, passing the time with a glass of wine and a telephone conversation. He was probably dealing with some issues related to his monstrous business. But when he saw his friend, he immediately hung up the phone and stood up. "Hello, Michael." The old friends hugged. "Look at you, you haven't abandoned the gym." Michael smirked, poking his fist into Charles's steel biceps. "Do you want to be young forever?" "I can't keep up with you." He was not in debt. "Good for you." "Still doing Botox, and I still do not dare." "I'm sorry." Michael sighed with courtly sadness. "Nobody gets any younger. You've already got silver in your hair, and I think you'll be bald soon." It was a typical exchange of courtesies, which no meeting was without. Having finished with this introductory part, the friends finally sat down at the table. "Did you call me here for nothing, or for business?" Michael asked. "But why do I ask? It is clear that it was business. Otherwise, I would have come just to visit, right?" "Right." Charles smiled. "I've got something to do with you, and it's strictly male. Your Betty doesn't need to know about it. You see, I met this girl a few months ago." Michael chuckled understandingly. "And now you don't know how to break up with her?" "You guessed." But Charles shook his head. "No, I know that, but this is different." He began to tell the story slowly, in detail, and Michael, listening to his friend, suddenly remembered their childhood together. Charles had always been like that, trying to consider every situation in detail, taking into account all the circumstances, and only then to decide something. There was no spontaneity in him, but he always made a very balanced decision and was rarely wrong. Do you remember when I decided to take a vacation at Christmas? Charles told me. I went to Thailand for 2 weeks. It was beaches, clubs, beaches. I met her at one of the clubs. Pretty girl, legs, breasts. A stripper dancer, Michael asked. Charles nodded. Yeah, well, they're at work, and it's forbidden to show affection. But I could see that she was looking at me. She liked me. All right, I guess I don't care. I'm a free man. I waited until she came home from work, and that's how we met. She turns out to be American. Name's Nancy. And of course, she didn't go into this dance for the good life. And that's where it all started. And then I said to her, "Why are you hanging around here?" "Why don't you come with me?" She agreed. I got her an apartment and everything was fine for a month and a half, and then I realized it wasn't my thing. Yeah, she got cold too. I could see that. And it started, she doesn't like everything and everything is boring and cold. Anyway, it's time for us to break up. Well, I don't get it, Michael. So break up. What's stopping you? Charles didn't answer at once, sipped more wine, thought for a moment. You see, he finally said, Nancy is from a small town, simple family. I've shown her a beautiful life, and now I'm going to leave her. What's she gonna do? She's gonna look for a richer daddy and end up in a dump. You know how it is, don't you? I'd really like her to have something she likes to do, to live a decent life, respecting herself. And there, you see, she'll find a good, proper guy, a family will be formed. She once said that she always dreamed of dancing in some decent place. Maybe there's a place for her in your theater. Michael thought for a moment. I'm more on the commercial side of things, Charles. He said that he's in charge of choreography. We seem to have a full company, but I'd like to see your Nancy. Maybe we can put her somewhere, at least in the Corps de Ballet, and then if she shows herself. Charles smiled. I knew you'd say that. That's why I asked you to come. She's on her way. Michael suddenly noticed that a tall brunette in a red dress was approaching their table. He went up to meet her and froze, unable to say anything. Wonderful dark hair fell in waves on her shoulders. Her coffee-colored eyes with raised corners attracted, lured, promised. And the girl also had magically beautiful golden skin. Is that her? Hoarsely, he asked Charles. Is that her? The girl walked over to them and leaned over to kiss Charles on the cheek. What Michael noticed at that deep cleavage made his breath hitch. Meet Nancy, said Charles. This is my old friend Michael. He runs the Contemporary Dance Theater. The beautiful girl turned to Michael and cast a languid glance at him from under her thick lashes. Charles told me about you. Her voice was soft and intimate, as if she were whispering with him in the bedroom, between kisses, rather than greeting a stranger. I've been wondering about you, too. He awkwardly popped up from the table to pull back a chair for Nancy. Allow me to sit down. The girl thanked him with a smile, and that smile made Michael almost physically feel the tickling sparks run through his body. This had never happened to him before, never. He didn't notice his friend's anxious gaze on him, didn't notice the waiters smirking visibly as they passed their table. You, Charles, said you were a dancer. Nancy, let's not talk about that. Charles interrupted her. The bar and the forfeitures are in the past. We're here to think about how we can get you back to dancing. Michael, who until then had been serving as if mesmerized, seemed to stumble over these words. Really, how? To do it bypassing Betty was impossible. Then how should he be? Lose Nancy, that bird of paradise? Not at all. He must find a way to keep her with him. We'll think of something, he promised the girl. Tomorrow, say, by 11 o'clock, come to the theater, show yourself to our ballet master, and we'll think together what we can do for you. Now I must go too. Charles came up at once. Nancy, you stay. Order whatever you like. Have it put on my account. They went outside, and Michael was surprised to note that it was already dark. He had lost track of time. But of course he had kept his eyes on Nancy, so where could he have seen anything? Betty must be waiting. He muttered unhappily, thinking of his wife. Michael. Charles looked at him shrewdly. You have a great wife. You remember that? Okay. Don't forget that. Michael became alarmed. Was he so obviously in love that even Charles had noticed? That's the last thing we need. Why did he just say that? He asked, trying to convey in his voice the surprise of a faithful husband who was suddenly suspected, unjustly of course, of sympathizing with a strange woman. Charles did not hold back a chuckle. As a man, I understand you. He answered calmly. Anyone would fall for Nancy. I've been through it myself. But I'll tell you frankly, it's too expensive to take her seriously. She's not worth a Betty nail. Don't be mad. I'm being friendly. Are you trying to piss me off in a friendly way? Michael grinned. Come on, I'm not stupid. I wouldn't trade my Nancy for anyone. Okay, bye. I'll say hello to my wife for you. Nancy picked at her salad with her fork without interest and pushed her plate away. There was no appetite at all. This Michael had obviously had his eye on her. Now he would do anything to get her a job in his theater. Now it was important to play her cards right, to keep his attention, and most importantly, to warm him up, not being stingy with advances. Then soon she will become not just a pretty puppet, as it has been so far, but a significant, wealthy person. It was a pity, of course, that Charles would have to be parted with. She liked him, but he was too independent, not easy to control. But Michael, something told her, would be the kind of man she could make ropes out of, and that was just what she needed. Nancy nodded to the waiter. Take the salad away and bring me a bolognese with mushrooms in a cream sauce and a red wine of your choice. I don't know anything about alcohol. Anything else? The waiter asked politely. Cucumber and tomato salad, shouted Nancy, with greens and mayonnaise dressing. Don't ask stupid questions and carry my order. Her mood improved a little. Life is a zebra. Not long ago, she was striptease dancing and living in a filthy doghouse on the backside of civilization, and then she met Charles, and now she lives in a nice, albeit small, apartment and dines at a restaurant. That's great. And when she realized she was losing interest in Charles, she didn't have time to feel bad, but Michael came along. And with him, she's got a good chance of making a name for herself. No, this was definitely working out very well. Nancy took a sip of wine and smiled. This wine was good. Tart, moderately sweet, and at least it was a reminder of what living people ate and drank. Dancers are supposed to watch their figure, but how human is that? Eating nothing but chicken breast or leaf lettuce? In her youth, Nancy loved fries, as Michael had expected. Betty was beginning to worry. Of course she didn't make a scene. It wasn't in her nature. Michael couldn't remember if there had been any fights in their married life. It seemed they had never had any. Now Betty was reading a book quietly and showed no signs of irritation at the sight of her husband. I was beginning to worry a little in case something happened. She smiled. Why didn't you call? I'm sorry, Nancy. Michael touched her cheek lightly with his lips. Nancy, so simple, so warm, like the cornflower that grows by the house. You look at it and you feel better, because it's familiar, it's native, it's familiar. Even the appearance of his wife was some kind of peaceful nose, lips, hair, no sharp line, no bright contrasts. Blue eyes, russet waves of hair, skin, a little touched with tan, everything in moderation, all harmonious. That's what he always said about Betty, or maybe she just wasn't any good. Out of the blue, Michael thought, and was startled by the thought. No, 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 that's nonsense. Nancy is great. Loyal, honest, hardworking. Constant after all, and that's a lot by our standards. Yes, women like that are worth their weight in gold. This inner monologue calmed him down a little, and Michael even managed to smile at his wife. I am so happy when you are waiting for me at home, he said almost sincerely. I was late because Charles took me to a cafe in the evening. I was on my way home when he intercepted me. Well, she seemed genuinely upset. Charles, why didn't you ask him to come over? It's been 100 years since we've seen each other. A childhood friend. Don't be angry with him. Michael laughed. He'd like to see you too, and he sends his regards to you. But you see, this time he had a request, a delicate one in general. So he was sure you'd say no. By the way, I'm sure of it too, and I told him that right away, but he made me promise that I'd talk to you anyway. What kind of a request is that? What did he want? Help hide a body, rob a bank, what? No, 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 it's much simpler than that. He wanted a girl he knew to join our troupe. Who's the girl? Betty asked. Here it was necessary to be very careful not to arouse the slightest suspicion. Michael poured himself some water and sat down across from his wife. I think it's his mistress, he said nonchalantly. I didn't ask for details, but I guessed something. He pulled her out of some back alley, cleaned her up, fed her. Charles says it would be good to put her to work, so you know, how long before trouble? It's a pity, isn't it? But if he's so worried about her, the wife says he could help her get an education, then get a job. Michael, I understand and even support Charles. He is good that he doesn't want to leave the girl to her fate, but why does he want to place her with us? And she dreams of dancing with us, and she seems to have some training. I don't think she's that talented, but a friend asked her to do it. You should see her tomorrow. Maybe we can find something for her. Well, Nancy drummed her knuckles on the table thoughtfully, beat out some kind of dance rhythm. If Charles asked me to, I'll try to do something and stick it somewhere. So you're saying hardly a talent? Well, what about her looks, or you haven't seen her? Why not? I have. Michael nodded. But to be honest, I didn't pay much attention. What am I supposed to do? Notice all the Charles women. She must be pretty. So we have a deal. Will you put her with us? Betty shrugged. I can't promise a concert lineup, she said. But let her come in, rehearse. We'll start with the Corps de Ballet and see how she does. Thank you, darling. Michael shone. Then I'll rinse and go to bed. I'm tired. Only when he was alone, locked in the bathroom, could he finally relax and congratulate himself on his victory. Betty, apparently, did not suspect anything, even promised to help. This, of course, was not without mentioning the magical Charles name. Yes, childhood friendships either end with childhood or last a lifetime. But the important thing was, it all worked out. He'd had that dangerous conversation with his wife, and he'd won. Well, that's great. Good for him. Michael realized that today he hadn't just managed to fool his wife. He had fulfilled his friend's request, and at the same time he had gotten Nancy in close proximity to him. Now she would be there for him. Strangely enough, he was thinking of her calmly now, without fever. This girl was so impossibly beautiful it seemed like a dream. Perhaps tomorrow, when they saw each other again, he would wonder what he had found in this sweet, but in general ordinary girl yesterday. After all, it was likely that in the daylight it would appear that she had a pimple on her forehead, or even several, or that her lips were peeling. Michael thought about it and hoped that that was exactly what would happen. Never in his life had he thought he would be so eager for disappointment. But it was the only thing that could help now, because if tomorrow's meeting didn't disappoint him, how could he live then? And Nancy, the nightmare came again. She returns to her native town, but finds it deserted. The houses on the streets familiar from her childhood stand with their windows open in winter, and behind them there is darkness and silence. And it is immediately clear that there is no one there, not a soul. Only an old merry-go-round creaking in the yard and spinning by itself, as if ghosts were riding on it. At this point, Nancy always woke up and lay with her eyes open for a long time, still hearing that frightening, dead creak. This damned dream wore her nerves out at intervals of about once every few months, and she couldn't get used to it. Tonight's nightmare was unusual. There were new details in it. Walking through the empty city, Nancy kept turning around, someone calling her name. She still couldn't recognize the voice, though it seemed familiar. And then suddenly, unexpectedly, she realized that these responses someone's evil joke, to frighten her completely, so that she would never be able to leave this place. She decided to ignore them then, but whoever had come up with this prank wasn't stupid either. Now she was distracted from all sides, and the voices calling for her multiplied, echoing, giggling. Nancy squatted down beside the very creaking carousel and covered her ears with her hands. And then she woke up. "I'm never going back there," she thought. Over and over she said that soothing mantra, and it usually worked, but today something went wrong. Nancy tangled herself in the blanket and went into the kitchen. Tea. The girl promised herself. Strong, with milk and sugar and cookies. She wanted to chase away the cold sadness of her dream, to warm herself, to remind herself of the present, of the troubled city outside the window, of the chocolate chip cookies, of being in the past. It's like you're here and not here. Charles once said, like you're in two worlds at once. Nonsense. She smiled. She didn't want to admit that he was right, even to herself. And that's the way she lived. That's right. There was an outside world in which you had to be able to spin to get anywhere, and another world that Nancy never told anyone about. In that secret world of hers, her favorite cat, Marquise, was alive, and a shaggy black dog ran around the yard barking. There, in summer, lupines and lion's eye grew along the fence, and in winter, the snow was white as a downy blanket. Nancy, a girl from the suburbs, in a chintz sundress and sandals, was tilling the beds and looking at the gate. Soon her friend would come to pick her up, and together they would run to the dance class at the local House of Culture. She had once met Mason there after a concert. She hurried down the stairs, and as if she ran into an invisible wall when she saw him. How handsome he was! Blue eyes like the sea she had only seen in pictures. He was so tall that she had to throw her head back to look at his face. Mason noticed this and went down a couple of steps. "I saw you on stage," he said, smiling. The smile was so cheeky that Nancy laughed. "He's a lousy liar and he doesn't care." "What dress was I wearing?" she asked, hoping to catch him out, but the trick failed. "Red." The boy answered without hesitation. "You had a flower pinned behind your ear." "Right here." He jokingly tugged on her ear. "Come on, I'll walk you home." "It's getting late." He threw his jacket over her shoulders, took her hand, and led her home like a little girl. It was so unusual, funny, but also very, very exciting. Nancy saw the eager curiosity with which the passing girls looked at Mason. She was walking down the street for the first time with a young man who was not her, neither relative nor classmate, walking straight as a couple. Awkwardly, she joked, "So we are a couple." Mason answered as if he took it for granted, and then when it was dark, they kissed for a long time at the gate of the Nancy house, and the girl didn't care that now rumors were sure to spread around their private sector. Let them talk. What did it matter if the most long-awaited adventure in the world, love, happened to you? Within a week they were considered both bride and groom. And after another month, Mason climbed over the fence at night and knocked on their sleeping bedroom window. "What?" she asked in her sleep, but when she saw Mason's pale face with drops of sweat on his forehead, she realized, "There's trouble. I've lost my money, Nancy." He barely uttered it, his lips quivering. The girl silently poured water into a mug and handed it to him. The guy greedily drank the water to the drop and wiped his mouth with the palm of his hand. He said, "I'll give it to you, you fool. So give it back." She still didn't know what he was talking about. "Give it back and be done with it." Mason groaned, clutching his head. "What kind of a fool are you, Nancy? I have no money. I played on credit. Now if I don't pay it back, I'll be cut to pieces." "All right." He took a breath and looked at Nancy with sore, inflamed eyes. "The thing is, Nancy, I've got to go away today now. I'm sorry, okay? Forget it." "Wait." Nancy touched his forehead and wiped away the sweat. "Wait, Mason, what do you mean, forget it? How much money do they need?" "I'll get it." "Where?" He shouted in a whisper. "Where will you get it?" "Tell me where. We'll find them somewhere." She threw off her nightgown and in a minute was standing dressed to go out. "Let's go," she called out in a whisper. "Let's go out the window." The only man with money the girl knew was the choreographer of their dance club, William. Where did he get the money from? No one really knew. True, it was said that he distilled moonshine and sold it, but Nancy paid no attention to these conversations. Moonshine existed outside her world, and so did the people who needed it. "William." She knocked on the choreographer's window. There was a light on and voices coming from the room. "Is he having company?" "William, it's Nancy." Mason hissed something indistinctly. "Nancy?" "Yeah, shut up." She whispered at him. "William, I have a favor to ask of you." "I have no one else to go to, please." The window opened. "What do you want, Nancy?" The choreographer asked unhappily. "You're making a racket in the middle of the night under an honest man's window." "William, I want money." Nancy blurted it out without saying anything in vain. The room outside the window was filled with men's laughter. William waved his hand carelessly at his guests, and all was quiet. "I need some." The girl continued. "I need... Mason, how much do you need?" She looked over her shoulder, but she didn't see her friend. "Mason!" She yelled across the street, forgetting the time of day. "Mason! Mason! There he is," the choreographer said calmly, seeing the pale, shaking fellow peering out from around the corner of the house. William looked with visible disgust at Mason's lanky figure and disheveled hair. "U.S. Shoal! Here she is, running around at night in other people's houses, looking for money to borrow. And you're afraid to show your face in public. Is that you?" He turned to Nancy. "Because of him, he needs money?" The girl nodded. "All right, hang on. I'll be right out." "Come on, Nancy." Pulled her sleeve by the guy, she silently pulled her arm out. The door opened and William, dressed in a homemade tracksuit, stepped leisurely onto the porch. "And he's for you, maiden, you're my red one." He began, glaring at the boy's haggard face. "Did he tell you who he owed what to?" "No, it's nothing. I'll tell you that. He owes me, Nancy. And you're a fool. You'd better go to bed than run around at night. No one forced him to play. It was his own fault. Let him clean up his own mess." "William, I'll do it." Nancy said firmly, "Would you like me to clean for you? come to your house? I can cook and tend the garden, and you'll die of old age before you pay off his." The choreographer pointed his finger at the silent Mason. "Debt, and he'll make new ones in the meantime, that you'll always have to work for his foolishness. Do you know what a gambler is, Nancy? Take some good advice. Go home to bed, lie down and forget it. Forget that ashhole." "I won't," she shouted. "You, William, what have you got in your life besides work?" "No wife, no kids, and I know you're in love. So why can't you see who you've fallen in love with? There's your beloved standing there, silent. He's the one who's setting you up right now. He's not the one who's thinking about how to get money, and he's not the one who's offering to work it off. It's you. And he's standing there like a lamb of God, offended, waiting for you to do everything for him. You're a total, all right." He cut himself off. "You can't hear a damn thing." "All right, you want to help him, I'll send you overseas. I got a friend who runs a bar there. You'll work for him as a dancer. He'll give you a place to live. You won't have to pay for it. We'll split your salary, half for you to live on, half for your dog's debts. Do you agree? No? Make up your mind quickly. People are waiting for me. Agreed?" Nancy didn't hesitate. And only then, on the way home, she suddenly realized that now there was no turning back. Soon she would leave here, and for 2 years she would not see these streets, or her room, or her lover, not even her cat and dog, and those she would not see. Mason walked silently along beside her. Nancy longed for him to encourage her, to say something affectionate, or at least to take her hand. But he kept on walking, raking the gravel with his feet, and sighing heavily from time to time. "Will you wait for me?" The girl asked timidly. He only sniffed his nose. "Where could I go?" "I'll wait for you, of course. When you come back, we'll get married." Nancy smiled slightly. Married. Now it would be a little easier for her to get through these 2 years. It's always easier when there's something to look forward to. The gravel under their feet rustled a little too loudly for a summer night. She'd given the house she lived in to Mason, and not without a hidden agenda. Let everything around it remind him of her. Nancy had hoped her lover would call her every day, but alas, there was trouble with that. She called more often, and the fiancé said he had something urgent to do. "I got a job at the motor pool." Reluctantly, he said into the phone. "Well, you have to work. What's to live on?" "Okay, Nancy, I have to send the guys on a trip, bye." She felt she couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. She wanted to drop everything to go home, but what was left of her paycheck was only enough for the most meager of meals. The owner of David's bar smiled wickedly at her requests for a raise. "You see, Nancy, I'm not making any profit. I don't get many customers, only locals. What can I get out of them? You know we feed off tourists, and it's the off-season. Where am I going to scrape you up?" And then he lowered his voice. "You figure it out? The other girls will find out I'm paying you more. They'll demand a pay raise for themselves. What am I, an oligarch, a Danish prince? No, Nancy. Don't you even come to me with that question. Vaughn, you want to have a drink on me? Let's call it a night." Luckily, some 10th darling, Charles, came out to their rundown bar, and seeing the beautiful stripper in no time, arranged everything with David. A few days later, Nancy was already pacing the dusty, "Nothing here in 2 years has changed," road to her house. The gate was unlocked. Nancy entered the yard and did not hear a cheerful dog barking, and the dog kennel had gone somewhere. She looked around confused, not recognizing her home nest, and didn't immediately understand what had happened here. The hulk of the house, burned black, stuck out in front of the girl, and only the surviving porch was almost untouched by the fire. and on this porch she had once liked to sit with a mug of milk and a piece of bread. The porch was dear to her. Except now it led nowhere. "You're back. Haven't seen you in a while." Nancy looked back and saw her neighbor at the gate. Yeah, nothing's changed. And Aunt Miranda is still the same round, and her kerchief on her head is still the same, white with a pretty blue flower. Nothing changes and everything changes. "Hello, Miranda." "What's this here?" The woman sighed heavily and waved her hand. "Can't you see?" "Oh, trouble, trouble. It's your Mason." Drunkenly set a fire. The whole street piled in. They barely put it out. They helped the firemen. "How?" "He was out here with some girls." Nancy shuddered. "Who with?" "You're lying, Aunt Miranda. And shame on you, you're a grown woman." But the neighbor was not embarrassed. "Ask anyone." She gestured around the street. "As soon as you left, he started walking the devil. And then he burned down the whole house and went into the bushes. And you say I'm lying." "They say." "What do they say?" The girl interrupted. "Aunt Miranda?" "What?" "They say, what's there to hide? They say he married a rich woman, the market director's daughter." "Lisa, is that her?" "She's fat, fat, fat. Why should she be thin if she's not poor? Why not eat with Daddy's money?" The whole town was buzzing at their wedding at the best restaurant in town. Mason was unrecognizable. He used to be a simple guy, and now he's looking down, saying hello through his lip. And that Lisa, the fat girl, she's all over him, just clinging to him. "Huddle, you say?" She remembered Lisa from their dance class. She was a fat, clumsy girl who couldn't repeat even the simplest movements, but for some reason she was always included in the concert lineups and was even given leading parts. Of course, the girls whispered among themselves, but no one openly resented her. Everyone knew who Lisa's daddy was, and they also knew that once a week on Saturdays, a car driven by the market directors came to their house of culture and began the planned distribution of delicacies. There and the director of the house of culture and choreographers and even janitors. Even the alcoholic janitor was not forgotten. She necessarily brought 2 bottles of white and red wine, a few bottles of vodka, and necessarily beer bottle 10. Such an island of abundance in a separate house of culture. And this is the coffer her Mason married? And she's the one clinging to him? I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Nancy muttered. Aunt Miranda nodded sorrowfully. That's the thing about us. Believe it or don't believe it. I'm just telling it like it was. Dad sent them on a honeymoon, too. That's what my friend told me. You know she works at the airport. She saw them there herself. She issued the tickets for them, and they have the same surname now, and she saw the rings with her own eyes. I see, Nancy replied dryly. Where were they flying to? The neighbor hesitated. I don't remember. I'm sort of in the... But what do you mean? With a T? I think it's a word. Thailand? That's what the girl said. Thailand. Thank you for the story. Aunt Miranda, I'll be off. The woman looked after her, furrowing her brow and whispering something silently. Either she was praying for something, or she was reading. With Mason, they, strangely enough, met the same day. On the way out of town, Nancy stopped for gas. Suddenly she saw Mason in a nearby auto. He turned at the sight of her, and his face contorted with annoyance. Holy shit! It came out of his mouth. Nancy, ignoring this peculiar greeting, nodded discreetly. Hello, Mason. Good day to you, too. I see you're back already. How did you like it in Thailand? As for me, it's a bit hot there, and insects can bite. Your wife didn't complain, did she? He averted his eyes. Why are you organizing all this? He asked reproachfully. Why? Don't you understand anything? He spoke so tiredly and so disappointed. I don't understand. Nancy raised her voice. But I understand the other thing very well. I understand that I spent almost 2 years twisting my ass in front of a drunk to pay off your card debts. I also realized that I ate every meal and lived in a room with cockroaches, but I thought it was nothing. My sweet Mason is waiting for me at home. I realized that I was counting small things. I forgot about sleepy rest and thought about everything. I don't care. My darling is waiting for me at home, and my darling burned down my house. So I don't have a home anymore. And my lover doesn't bother me either. And why should he think about me now? He has a different social circle than before. And he married someone else. That's what I mean. And what are you talking about? No, I don't understand. I've become stupid. Did I ask you to do that? He exploded. Did I ask you to do that? Think about it. You made up your own mind. And now it's my fault. You know what, Nancy, you better blame yourself. Don't confuse me with that. You're a sacrificial lamb. You traded your maiden honor for your lover, and he didn't appreciate it. I'm weeping from injustice. Finishing his furious tirade, Mason took a snow-white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead with it. You're making my blood pressure rise, he said pitifully. And I told you you'd wait, said the girl, and her voice treacherously trembled. I said I'd come and we'd get married. Mason grinned cynically and harshly, which made his face, so still beautiful and young, disfigured and as if at once aged. What did you think I was supposed to say? That I didn't want a prostitute fiancée? That the girl I loved for a moment decided stripping was a good thing? That it was a disrespectful thing to marry her? Is that what I'm supposed to tell you? All right, Nancy, that's it. We've had our talk and that's it. Go where you're going. So that was the end of the story, Nancy thought. As if it wasn't about her first love, but about a book she'd read. Nancy never once allowed herself to cry, though tears choked her all the way back. And then, when she was already sitting in the apartment she had rented and waiting for Charles, they met once more, and again quite by chance. Nancy and Charles were at the theater, and suddenly Nancy caught someone's gaze from a nearby box. Looking closer, she recognized Mason surrounded by his new family. His wife's parents, eager to look like avid theatergoers and therefore pompous to the point of ridiculousness. The wife, Lisa, was there, still as fat and thickly made up as before, except that she was wearing more diamonds. She clutched tightly the hand of her beloved husband, Mason, and minute by minute she was fixing his hair or shaking off invisible dust from his shoulder. She did not look at the stage at all. Mason was obviously bored. In addition to the fact that he was drawn to the ceremonial image, his hand now and then flew to his throat to loosen the knot of his tie. And, as Nancy noticed, he wasn't used to jackets either. He was always fidgeting with his sleeves and could never get comfortable. Once, when he took his wife's hand away from his hair, he looked at his own palm squeamishly. Social life was new to all of them. Charles leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Who's that guy?" "He's in the next box, staring at you." "Nonsense," she whispered back, "a classmate." At intermission, Nancy left the box and immediately ran into Mason. It was as if he'd been waiting for her there. Watching, he smiled. "Aren't you lost in this life? Social life, theaters, ballets, found my place in the big city. I wish you the same." The girl chirped carefree. Mason remained unperturbed. "Who's that in the box with you?" "Daddy." "He's all right, but he's old, Nancy, old." "You're losing your touch. Does he keep you on your money, though?" "Spoils you." as much as he spoils you with your piggy bank. By the way, are you living well under her watchful eye? I hope you haven't run up any new debts, have you?" Mason shrank back at these words, and Nancy saw his fingers fidget, fumbling along the buttons of his jacket. "So you're in debt again." Satisfied, the girl said, and returned to her box. Late that night, Mason, frankly drunk and miserable, began to cut off her cell phone. "I didn't want to marry Lisa." He scratched the phone. "Believe it, Nancy, I even thought about running away. But her father has money, and you know what I am. A gambling addict who burned down my house." Nancy said coldly, "Oh, yes, I was so ashamed of you. You did it for me, and I couldn't wait for you. And I couldn't play the game. You know how I sit down to play? I think I'm gonna get lucky, and then I'll be on the first plane to Thailand, pick you up, and we'll get married." "Nancy, can you hear me, Nancy?" "I can," she said. "And then, after I got married, I was afraid to meet you. I was ashamed to the point of having nightmares about you. My wife took me by the scruff of the neck and took me to the doctors. I spent a month in a psychiatric hospital. They all examined me, twisted and turned, and so gave me some pills, but the dreams did not stop. I just stopped being afraid of them, that's all." She grinned. "Then they let me out after all, and I smelled that I would see you soon. I was walking and frightened of my own shadow. I thought you might pop out of every corner, but we met at a gas station. Nancy, don't believe what I told you the other day. I'm sick to my stomach myself. You know, remember, I only loved you as best I could, but you alone." He finally passed out. Maybe his phone had just gone dead, and Nancy put the receiver away with relief. Loved me, didn't love me. What did it matter now? There was nothing left. No more love, no more home to return to, nothing but nightmares. But since then, and settled in her heart, this fierce hatred of rich people who did not know the humiliation that fell to her share. "If only I had money then, lots of money," she often thought. "I wouldn't have had to go to Thailand. There would have been no striptease and no nightmarish return to my hometown where no one wanted me. And how dare Mason treat me like that? Yeah, he was an asshole. That's true. But if I was a rich chick, I wouldn't even know it. We'd be married, and he'd carry me around in his arms like he carries his Lisa now. Wouldn't it be nice to go back there in a different way? A rich girl who's throwing her money around left and right. Then he'd come to me on his knees and beg me to forgive him." "Michael, it's impossible to work anymore," Betty complained. Her husband looked up from his papers. Betty in the theater always respected the subordination and never broke into the office of her husband, bypassing the secretary. And the fact that she called him simply by his first name already told him that the wife could barely contain herself. "What is it, Betty?" he asked sympathetically. "Sit down, maybe some coffee. Would you like some?" "Listen, Michael," she said in a voice ringing with anger. "I took this young lady into the company at her request, as agreed in the Corps de Ballet, but she is late for an hour for every rehearsal. She's rude to the choreographers, behaves like a lady. I'm not even talking about her data. She moves in a clumsy way. Okay, that can be fixed, but you have to work for it. You've got to work, Michael, not chill out." Anyway, Betty finally sat down in the chair she was offered. "I don't know what to do with her. She's mean to the girls. She's had 2 fights in the locker room, tardiness, but I've already talked about that. The other day before yesterday, I was walking down the stairs and the cleaning lady was mopping the floors. And what did Nancy do? She kicked the bucket and went on her way, happy. A whole bucket of dirty water, Michael. What do you suggest? Fire her? Betty shrugged her shoulders. I don't know. Fire her. Charles might take offense. Leave things the way they are. Well, no, you can't do that either. I've just been exhausted for 2 months. We've got an opening night coming up, and it takes half my energy to get Nancy to behave. I'm just so tired. And then you know as well as I do, if you have someone like that on the team, they all talk. One lousy sheep spoils the whole flock. Michael listened to his wife, nodding in time with her words. All right, he said conciliatingly. Let me try to talk to her myself. Maybe she'll hear me at least. What do you say? But I wouldn't count on much if I were you. Betty got up and went to the door. Send her to me, Michael asked. Okay. Nancy showed up a couple minutes later, swaying her hips in the office, making Michael immediately hot. What kind of girl is that? Everyone goes to rehearsals dressed plainly, but look at this one. Scarlet t-shirt so stretched on the chest that not even an hour will crack, and these pants are hers. Everything you can and can't do is in plain sight. Bullying, kitten? Michael smiled and came closer to hug her. The girl didn't like the idea. Your house mouse told me you wanted to see me, she said, sitting down in the chair. Betty. Michael corrected her. All right. The girl agreed. She threw off her shoes and put her feet up on the table. Your room mouse, Betty, said you wanted to see me. And what was that for? Michael covered the girl's bare feet with the palm of his hand. You can't be so careless, Nancy. He said, what if someone hears you? Let them hear, she purred. We've been together 2 months now, Michael, and it's time we stopped hiding in corners, especially if everyone around us has figured it out for a long time. It's not time yet. We've already done it with you. And more. She pouted her already puffy lips capriciously. She's always bossing everybody around. I understand. She's your ballet master, an important bird, all that. But I'm not a pig's tail either. I'm your favorite woman. Isn't that so? Isn't she or isn't she? Yes, darling, I am. But he stroked her leg. How do I explain this to her? Aren't you ready for a divorce? She asked. No. Michael admitted it, and it's not about you or her. It's just that I've put so much into this theater, and in a divorce, Betty and I have to share it. Betty, Nancy snorted. What tenderness. He hastened to correct his mistake. With Betty. But it doesn't matter, kitten, what you call her. What matters is that I mean, and you may be left without a theater. That's something to think about, and don't think it won't affect our income. The girl yawned defiantly. Honestly, I'd rather stay with Charles. He may be an undertaker, but he's a free man with no wives or other pets. Nancy, Michael said reproachfully, but it was as if she hadn't heard him. What's there to catch? Your fool always walks around with her lips puckered, and you only spank me for nothing. You're afraid to get a divorce. So what's the point of me hanging around here? And in a corps de ballet. No, Michael, I think I'm gonna get out of here. There's no prospects here, only nerves. She stood up, stretched cat-like and flexible. Don't call me Nancy. Michael grabbed her arm, desperation in his eyes. Nancy, wait, let's talk. What do you want? Don't go, kitten. Don't leave me. I agree. I'm a fool for creating this situation. I don't know how to get out of it, but give me time, I'll figure it out. Please, Nancy, never before have you felt so helpless and pathetic. Never before have you had to beg for anyone for anything. I'll sort it out, Nancy. You just wait, just a little longer, just a little while longer, and then you and I will be together. She looked at him, not hiding a contemptuous smile. Michael saw it, understood it, and did not care. Let her despise him. Let her not consider him a human being at all. I don't care, but let her stay close to him. Her look, her warm skin, those soft lips, all this became for him a drug, without which life lost all meaning. I've never loved anyone as much as you, he confessed. Various things happened to me. Everything was, both bad and good. But to go so crazy about a woman? Never. I cannot without you. I'll think that you left me, and then why should I live? Fool, she said almost fondly. What will change in a week? A month, even a year from now? You will still shake with fear for this theater, from his wife encrypted without end. I don't want to be like that. I'll think of something. Michael said again, You just wait a little longer. As Nancy was leaving the office, she almost ran into Betty. Was Michael free yet? The dancer shook her head tiredly. No, and I'll be damned if he'll be free of you. Although, personally, I wouldn't mind at all. Betty was taken aback. You, Nancy, are you showing up to work drunk now, too? I'm going to talk to Michael right now. Talk to whoever you want. Talk to your brains, if you've got any, of course. I've had it, Nancy bellowed. If you're so blind and you can't see that Michael loves me, and you're already there for him. She walked past, hitting her rival hard with her shoulder. I'll never set foot in your theater again. She shouted goodbye. You can dance around without me, and I'll be there for you. Betty remained standing in front of the door of her husband's office. No, it was a lie and hypocrisy to say that she did not notice anything. She was quite aware of Michael's reasons for even taking a shower with his phone. And these sudden absences from the house, supposedly to get an hour's air, and lingering well into the night. She guessed, of course, but she preferred not to dwell on those suspicions. After all, thinking and knowing were not the same thing. The only thing she couldn't assume was that her husband was having an affair at work, somewhere on the side, yes, perhaps, but to be so blatant, right in front of her nose. Betty slowly turned around and, without looking in Michael's office, wandered toward the exit. As always, in moments of serious upheaval, she wanted only one thing, to be home as soon as possible. Michael, hearing her footsteps, sighed with relief. He sat at his desk, looking at the message from his mistress. I've worked out a way for us to arrange things. Meet me in half an hour near the drugstore across from the theater. I'm waiting. Don't be late. Betty was not at all anxious for her husband to return from work. In fact, she hoped he'd be late again. She'd never been good at and didn't like confrontation. Come to think of it, had she ever had occasion to do so? No, she hadn't. And now there is. What should she say to her husband? Darling, do I know you're having an affair with someone else? And if he denies it, that's easy. Or another option, even more idiotic. Michael, do you have a mistress? Yes, I do. Is it Nancy? Yes, it is. What to say next was a complete mystery. Or else. Her thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. Betty picked up the receiver. Yes? Hello, Mouseful. Nancy's voice on the other end of the line was surprisingly cheerful. Did it get through to you, dumbass, that he doesn't care about you? And he won't care as long as he has a woman like me by his side. You're not with him. Betty snapped at him, but Nancy only laughed even louder. Not yet, but soon. Well, I've had enough of you, C.O. loser. And Nancy hung up. Betty suddenly laughed to herself. Everything that was happening, this Nancy talk, her unbridled rudeness, it was all so absurd that it made her laugh involuntarily. And Betty laughed, for a long time, at the top of her voice, until suddenly tears sprang from her eyes. Michael, fortunately, had not yet arrived, and Betty had no need to lock herself in the bathroom to cry in peace. Her life with her husband couldn't be called happy, but she wasn't miserable either. Michael had been primed for success ever since he was a child. An excellent student and the only gold medalist in their graduating class, sports dancing, athletics. He always read a lot. And in high school, the first went to preparatory courses and did it not by choice and insistence of parents and himself. And that's why Betty always liked not him, the perfect schoolboy and the embodied dream of his parents and teachers, but the cheerful Charles. They had been friends since they were very young. Michael, Charles, and Betty. Michael often joked that he remembered his wife even earlier than he remembered himself. Michael was the most serious of the trio, Charles the boldest, and Betty the centerpiece. They were never bored together. And what is surprising, their close circle, all three of them, carefully guarded from outsiders. For many years, in fact, since kindergarten and preschool graduation, no one had managed to join their company. And then the final bell rang, and Charles left. Betty experienced his departure as a real tragedy. She'd never told anyone she'd been in love with Charles since 8th grade, not even her mom. And after graduation, he has shocked her by announcing that he was leaving, probably for good. Michael, for some reason, was not very surprised by this. They must have already discussed it without her. Betty decided that she would definitely come to the train to see Charles off and at least open up to him when saying goodbye. She had gotten up terribly early that morning, and that was all just so she could get her hair done, choose a suitable dress, and have time to do her makeup. She really wanted Charles to remember her beautiful, very, very beautiful. Michael had promised to pick her up at 9:30 in the morning, but he called at 8. "Did you sleep it off?" he asked cheerfully. "Well, don't cry. Charles is not angry. He said to say hello to you." "What hello?" Betty was confused. "You said he had a train at 9 o'clock. I'm all packed. I'm just waiting for you." "Oh, Mother, you've heard the wrong thing. I told you several times that Charles decided to take the night train." Michael laughed into the phone. "No, Betty, you've really got it all wrong." "How did I get it wrong, Michael?" "I had it written down." She argued, realizing that it didn't matter now. Charles had left anyway. "You know what? Go to bed." Michael suggested it. "With all these exams, you've gone completely out of your mind. You should get some rest, Betty. You'll sleep. You'll be fine. Do you want me to pick you up tonight and take a walk?" "Yeah, we'll go for a walk." Betty hung up the phone and looked at her reflection in the mirror. How pathetic it had seemed to her, the hair, the dress, the slightly tinted lips. Now it all seemed like a rejected gift, the kind of gift that had been long and carefully chosen, carefully wrapped, and when it came time to present it, it had been glanced at and sent to the pile of cards and silly souvenirs. Charles was gone, and we could wash our faces and straighten our curls. Betty lay on the bed and cried into her pillow. At the same time, Michael brushed his hair and left the house. It was 8:40, and he would still have time to get to the train station and see his friend off. Michael did not stay anywhere that evening. He entered the apartment and from the threshold shouted cheerfully, "Betty, I'm home. Where are you?" She was about to answer that she was in the kitchen, but changed her mind. He'd be here himself. "Betty, are you asleep? What's the matter with you?" He looked into the bedroom and, not finding his wife there, grumbled something resentfully to the tray. Finally, it was the kitchen. "Ah, there you are hiding." Michael rejoiced. "Why don't you answer? I've been looking all over the house for you. Look, a surprise." He pulled out a box of chocolates tied with a huge bow from behind his back with a deft gesture of a magician. "Your favorite." I know. You can't have sweets. You have to keep in shape. And that's the right thing to do, by the way. But they caught my eye, and I couldn't resist." Betty thanked him for the gift with a nod. "Shall we have tea?" Michael put the cup in front of his wife and untied the bow on the box himself. "Get to it. Once every couple of months you can forget about the figurine, can't you? Come on, a couple of candies won't hurt. Your mistress called today." Without raising her eyes from the table, Betty reported. Her husband hummed, pouring tea. "Wow! Which one?" "I've had 8 or 12 of them in the last week. I don't remember exactly." "Stop clowning around," she said. "Please, Nancy." Betty took the candy and bit into it absent-mindedly. It was too much to go on with the conversation about everything she'd had to hear from the cheeky girl today. "Nancy?" Michael said in astonishment. "Wait, you mean you think I'm having an affair with Nancy?" "With her?" He leaned back in his chair and laughed loudly. "But honest to goodness, Betty." He squeezed out between fits of laughter. "If you're going to think of such a thing, why, Nancy? I'd have expected more imagination from you." "Because," replied the wife in a steady voice, she spoke to me today," and Betty waved her hand in the air. "Michael, my eyes are blurring. Help me, I can't get to the bed by myself." Her husband ran over to her and helped her up. "Come on, Betty, come on." "Burr?" "It's dark." Betty woke up to the cold. "Michael, would you turn up the heat and get me a blanket? It's freezing." No one answered her, and that was a shame. Jesus. Betty grumbled unhappily. Why is it that when you have to, there's no one? And when you don't, it's everyone. She opened her eyes, threw back the sheet, and sat up. What? Betty didn't recognize her bedroom. White-tiled walls, white-tiled floor, she was sitting on a hospital gurney, and there was another one next to it. The person lying on it was covered head to toe with a sheet. Even his face was covered. It was a nightmare, she muttered. This is a dream, isn't it? Just a dream. What kind of game? Her quiet voice sounded deafening in the silence. It seemed to bounce off the walls and resonate. What is it, Michael? Michael? Oh my God, what is this? Am I in the morgue or something? Betty jumped off the gurney, hit the neighboring one, and only now I understood everything. And having understood, I pressed my palm to my mouth, not to scream with horror. A human hand, with blue, dead skin, fell out from under the sheet. Betty rushed to the locked door and pounded on it with her fists. Open up, whoever's in there, do you hear me? Open up, damn it, I'm alive. Open up right now. Anybody there? There were hurried footsteps at the door, and the door swung open. A scared young guard stared at Betty with widened eyes. What are you doing here? How did you get in here? We'll find out. She tossed it past him like a hurricane. Call your superiors, come on. Call them right now. And shut this morgue down, for God's sake. Betty looked around. She'd seen this somewhere before. Well, familiar interiors. Charles, is the owner here? Is he? Well, call him right now and tell him Betty's locked in the fridge. What, Betty? You tell him and he'll figure it out. Call him. The kid, who hadn't come to his senses yet, flapped his eyes and poked his finger at the numbers on the screen. At last the long calls rang out, and Betty stopped darting from corner to corner. What a showcase, she said, at the several coffins displayed along the walls of the roof. Jolly good business your boss has, boy, said. On his way, mumbled the guard. What were you doing, sleeping? Betty asked angrily. Have you seen anyone here? no one. He wrinkled his forehead funny. I would have noticed, but the morgue has a back door, so they bring them in from there. I see, she sighed. Do you have any tea? I was lying in a morgue, not on a beach. Charles arrived half an hour later, and at the sight of Betty, froze in place. She was still frozen, pale and rubbing her palms together furiously. You know, he said confusedly, I had hoped until the last moment that this was all some kind of stupid prank. I wish I'd thought so. Charles, what's going on? I'm so lost. I don't understand anything. Charles came over to her, rolled her up in his jacket, hugged her tightly around the shoulders. Let's go to my office, Betty. You'll get warm, we'll have coffee. I don't understand anything yet. What about you? You don't remember anything at all. How did you get here? Well, I was at home, then Michael came over, we had tea and talked. And then, Charles, she stared at her friend in shock. Charles, I think I figured it out. Michael brought a box of chocolates. We had tea with candy, Charles. So, he didn't get it. What's that got to do with it? I ate a candy, just one, and I got dizzy. Even my eyes got blurry somehow. I asked Michael to help me to the bed. There was something in the candy in it. You know now? Well, all right. Let's say, Charles nodded. So you got dizzy and went to lie down. Then how did you get here? Betty covered her face helplessly with her hands. I don't know anything at all, Charles. Maybe I'm just crazy already. He stroked her head. Betty, I've thought of something. I'm going over to your house right now. Don't. There, maybe there. You have to. With a little pressure, he said. I have to. Tell me, who else might I meet there? Betty lost her brow. Well, this one, Nancy, I didn't want to tell you. Anyway, Michael and Nancy. Right? Don't go on. Charles interrupted. I got the gist of it. Betty shook her head. How ridiculous, how unconscionable. She looked up at Charles tiredly and smiled. Why did you have to leave on the night train? Would things have turned out differently if I had come to see you off? The night train? He asked in surprise. I took the morning train, and I was very upset that you didn't come to say goodbye. Michael told me you had the flu, and you're lying there with a fever. Michael told you. What flu? What fever? I got up bright and early. I was doing my makeups of that. So that you remember me like this? Beautiful. And then Michael called, even grumbled that I didn't see you off, didn't show up for the train. He also said I'd got it all wrong, what you told me about the night. So he just didn't want us to meet. Is that it? But why, Charles? It was always the three of us together. And Charles suddenly remembered the last summer they'd spent together, when Betty's parents had taken her to the sea, and he and Michael, 17-year-old boys, had gone to Charles's grandmother's cottage. There they had enough of everything, and the endless sky above their heads, and the green forest, and there were water bodies all around. You could fish or swim. The friends, having quickly managed to manage the household, burned a fire on the shore, roasted caught fish on it, and bathed in the lake without end. I bet I can swim across, Charles boasted. 15-round trip? Or shall we race against each other? Sit down already. Michael laughed. He ate too much and decided to go in the water. Are you suicidal? Come on, Michael, just admit you're weak. Charles, as always, was a gambler, and Michael, knowing this, was genuinely amused, looking at his friend. I'm weak. He didn't deny it. I've got a good head, don't you? Charles snorted indignantly. Time me. He ran into the water, making a fountain of spray. Michael looked seriously at his watch, and then at his friend's head. which was already in the middle of the lake. "Swim back!" he shouted with sudden alarm. He could not explain why he was suddenly so afraid. Charles could swim as well as a dolphin, and how many times they had swum across the lake together and alone could not be counted. But Michael suddenly became cold, as if frost had fallen on him in the middle of a summer night. "Charles!" No one answered him. "Get back!" shouted Michael, already frightened. "Swim back, Charles!" He was already rushing toward the water, still shouting and calling for his friend. He realized that it was useless, but he had to be in time. He swam, and it seemed to him that the lake water, familiar from his childhood, had become as viscous as honey. It was difficult to break through it, and his shoulders were already inhumanly aching from the strain. "Hold on," Michael whispered. He swam toward the middle of the lake where he had last seen Charles. "Hold on." He gathered more air into his chest and dived in. Almost immediately something silky came under his arm. He clutched the hair tightly in his fist and jerked it to the surface. Charles let out a loud convulsive breath. "Ashole," Michael hissed, almost drowned for crying out loud. He swam, supporting his friend, then dragged him out onto the sand. And all the while, every time, every second, he wanted desperately to punch Charles in the insolent face. Only the face was pale and so frightened that he couldn't get his hand on it. "Cramp?" he asked. Charles smiled smugly, and his eyes twinkled with laughter. "No. A mermaid dragged her to the bottom. You should have seen what she had." He gestured to the parts of the mermaid's body that impressed him especially. Here Michael could not stand it, and the friends laughed so loudly that they scared away a bird in the bushes. "Thank you, friend," said Charles, laughing. "You saved my life, and now I am in your debt." Michael patted him silently on the shoulder. They returned to this conversation almost a year later, just before graduation. "Remember, I'll continue?" Michael asked, as if by the way. "But that time at the lake?" Charles looked at him questioningly. "I remember. You can forget that." "Then?" Michael continued. "Give in to Betty? I know you have a soft spot for her, but I'm not playing around. I want to marry her." Charles put his head down. "You have a soft spot." Michael, being the considerate guy he is, "I didn't mean it. I know you love her." "Love her? What can you do against first love?" He both wanted to tell Betty and was afraid to. But how she'd ridicule him and send him away with all his tender feelings. Could it be like that? Surely it could, but still, in the back of his mind, Charles cherished the hope that one day they could talk frankly, and maybe even Betty could reciprocate. And now Michael had taken that hope away from him, and he hadn't, really. He just knew his friend owed him a favor. So he demanded repayment. The thought flashed through his mind, was it a friend? Charles knew for a fact that if he had saved Michael, he would never have reminded him of that. The thought was too frightening, and Charles hurried to push it away. Duty is duty, isn't it? In a low voice, Michael reminded him. Charles turned away. "I'll be gone after graduation," he promised briefly. Betty stood up. "Shall we go to my place together?" she said. "I had new questions for my husband. He was mean to me the other day. He knew everything and he did it. How is that fair? And I was waiting to hear from you, and then Michael told me you had a girlfriend here. What a torrid affair." By the bewilderment on Charles's face, she guessed it was another one of her husband's tricks. And then, she finished sadly, "I decided that it was a train wreck, so I agreed to go out with Michael. Then I married him." Charles sighed and took Betty's hand in his. "I'm sorry," he said, running his fingers over hers. I'm sorry. It's my fault for bringing Nancy to you. If it hadn't been for that, stop it." Betty waved him away. "But it wouldn't have been Nancy. It would have been someone else. Who knows who? Your Nancy only brought out what was hidden. Like litmus paper, like they used to show us in chemistry at school. You dip it in a reagent, it changes color. That's Nancy. She's the reactant, and Michael's the paper." "Well, are we sitting down?" "Let's go." "No," Charles told her firmly. "If we want to find out what happened to you, I have to go alone. In the meantime, you wait here for me, okay? There's tea, coffee, some cookies. You want to put on a movie and wait for me. I'll be back soon, but in the meantime, there's something you need to remember. I think they wanted to get rid of you, to kill you. Isn't that strange to you? Me? I'm not. If you and Michael had just gotten divorced, you'd be entitled to half of everything you'd made. And someone didn't like that, someone who wanted it all. Nancy? Michael wouldn't. Maybe she would. But to get to the bottom of this, we need them to come forward. And that's why we're going to go like this. Look, Nancy stretched out across the marital bed and smiled sweetly, Michael. Isn't this a great idea? In a couple hours, your bitch will wake up. You'll take her home, and she'll tell everyone she woke up in the morgue. That's a full-blown delusion. And then you're in the psych ward, insanity plea, guardianship. And then you're free. And most importantly, the theater will belong to you alone. And Betty? He asked hoarsely. What will happen to her? Michael did not share his mistress's enthusiasm. On the contrary, with each passing minute he felt more and more acutely that something terrible had happened, and the worst of it was not without his active participation. How did he dare to do such a thing? Disability pension. Nancy laughed. What's the matter with her? We'll find her some cozy boarding house with a forest nearby with a river, and we'll see to it that she's properly looked after. About 50 years she will easily live, only in peace and quiet. It's a dream of many. If you want to know, maybe some amateur club will organize there. See how good it is that I made a copy of the key to the Charles of the afterlife in time. But don't you think I'm adorable? She held out her arms to him. Well, come to me. Michael grinned crookedly, but did not take a step toward the girl. For some reason he felt creepy. Today Nancy had interfered with his wife, and tomorrow, to take possession of the theater, she would quickly think of a way to get rid of him. She'll think of a way to get rid of him, you can be sure of it. Suddenly he remembered how, about a couple of weeks after Nancy's arrival at the theater, his wife had complained to him that their company was going through a bad patch. I don't know what that's all about. One of the leading dancers was hit by a car not far from the theater. Now the girl was lying with fractures on the stretching. And there's absolutely no one to replace her, because half of the Corps de Ballet girls have some strange allergies. Girls with red spots all over their bodies, lined up at the dermatologist. Could be something in the concert clothes? In the fabric, said the doctor. The girls rewashed their costumes with hypoallergenic powder, but a day later their strange ailment returned. They're scratching themselves until they bleed. Betty was almost hysterical. The concert dresses are all revealing. How could they let girls like that on stage, and no one for the lead? But maybe Nancy will give you a chance to prove yourself. He suggested it. After all, she's the only one who doesn't itch yet, and her legs are intact. Try it. If she's on an emotional high, she'll do something great. Betty, of course, sighed and wailed, but finally agreed. However, Nancy showed nothing but laziness. After the performance, Betty returned her to the Corps de Ballet. Michael was terribly upset about it, especially because Nancy had been angry for 2 weeks and barely spoke to him. Why was he bringing it up now? Were you the one who went off on the girl the other day? He asked in a whisper. Nancy squinted at him. At Vanessa, I thought you'd be quicker on the uptake. What was there to do? Do you think your inadequate wife would have given me the lead? But you could have. He was interrupted by the doorbell. It was Charles. Charles, what are you doing here? Michael, not now. He held up his hand warningly. I went to pick up some papers today, and the orderly said there was an unknown woman frozen in the morgue. I went to look and recognized Betty. What? Michael shouted wildly. Charles, are you lying? I mean, she's. You're lying. I'm not lying. Sadly, Charles replied. She died of hypothermia. I don't know what to say, Michael. Nancy stood stone-faced on the threshold of the bedroom. Michael. She called softly, but he, his face twisted with savage rage, lunged at her. Nancy squealed. Charles pounced behind her, pulling his friend away from the girl. It was all her. Michael howled. She made the whole thing up. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to kill her. Yeah, what are you talking about? Charles shouted at both of them. What have you done? She told me it wasn't dangerous. She said. Charles looked at Nancy. What did you do? Was this all your idea? The girl shrugged her shoulder. Why the hell should I live like a beggar? Because that coward is afraid to divorce his gray mouse. What are you looking at? Yeah, it was my idea. I convinced that slug that his woman wouldn't freeze to death. Would he have agreed if he'd known? Michael's awake. What's going to happen now? To all of us, to me. Charles, I didn't mean to. But don't you believe me? Charles, I didn't mean it. Of course you didn't. Nancy grinned contemptuously. He didn't want to. He wanted the theater, Betty at home and me at night. Didn't he? Charles involuntarily stepped back from the girl. She was so repulsive to him that he was afraid she would touch him with the edge of her dress. Charles collapsed on his knees. Michael, don't ruin it. What do we do now, Charles? What do we do? Shut up. Charles, stop whining. It doesn't help. Let's all go to the morgue, take the body and dump it in the river before dawn. There's no telling what could have happened. She went for a swim and her leg cramped up. Will they believe that? Michael moaned. He sat on the floor with his fingers in his hair. No, you can't do that. Who would believe it? There's no other way out anyway. Charles cut him off. And in a couple of days, you'll have to report your wife missing before they find her. Get up, Michael, get up. Let's go. And you. He looked at the girl. You too. Me? Yeah, and you. Jump to his feet, Michael. You made the whole thing up. And now you want to get out of it. No way. Get in the car, now. Charles lost his patience. They drove for a long time in silence, broken only by Michael's sobs. He was scared. Only now he realized how right Charles had been when he had warned him not to get involved with Nancy. It would be worth it. That's what he'd said then. He hadn't listened to him. He thought Charles had been jealous, but it turned out that Nancy was a monster who had completely subjugated him and made him a murderer. I hate you. He exhaled. You scum, you bastard. I hate you. You only think you do. The girl smiled. She had regained her usual composure and will cease to seem as soon as you realize how many problems I have saved you. No need to fray nerves in court, divorce, divide the property. Shut up, screamed Michael. Shut up? You're a murderer. Both of you shut up, said Charles from his seat. Both of you. The funeral home was bright. The morgue is down the hall to the right, said Charles. Is she in there? Michael asked in a trembling voice. In the morgue? No. The door to Charles' office swung open and Betty stepped in. Good night, you bastards. Did everything work out, Charles? Of course it did. He took the tape recorder out of his pocket. It's all here. I think it's enough to send them to a place not so far away. No, Michael whispered, backing up against the wall. No, no, no. He shook and fell to his knees, crossing himself, muttering as if he were casting a spell. No, no, no. Without me. Suddenly Nancy laughed and rushed across the hall to the door. She'll run away. Betty gasped. Charles shook his head. Don't worry about it. The police are waiting for him, and this one. He nodded disgustedly at Michael, who had given up crossing and mumbling and was now just quietly swaying from side to side. This one won't need to be detained. Come in and get him. What's going to happen now? Betty said softly as Michael, sobbing and mumbling again, was led out of the bureau. What's going to happen now, Charles? He put his arm around her, stroked her shoulder. You need to get some sleep now. That's the first thing. I'm not going home. Betty shivered. I don't want to go there ever again. It's not my home anymore. Then let's go to my place, said Charles. Take a bath, get some sleep, and then we'll figure out how to live our lives. And you? I'll sleep on the sofa, like in better times. Charles winked at her, and then they drove through the crazy city night, and Charles deliberately took his time because they had so much to talk about. And Betty suddenly felt really happy for the first time in years because there was a road to drive on, and Charles was there, so safe and easy to be with, and at the end of the night she had a bath and a chance to sleep. Is it too much to be happy?